Chapter 1722. The spatial storms were like sharp blades, slicing through the barriers Yi Zichen had formed with his divine power. The situation was far worse than Yi Zichen had imagined. The storm's razor-sharp edges slammed into the barriers around him. After forming the barriers, Yi Zichen could clearly feel his divine power draining away in order to maintain its stability. It consumed an enormous amount of divine power. Yi Zichen had to continuously consume divine-grade spirit recovery pills to maintain the barrier's stability. After falling into the spatial fault, Yi Zichen's eyes were bloodshot, but he regained his clarity of mind. He regretted a bit, but now that he was here, he truly realized what a terrible decision he'd made. His pills would eventually run out. If he wanted to leave this place alive, he had to find a spatial passageway and leave before he ran out of pills. There was no end to the pitch-black space. Yi Zichen gathered flames in his palm, causing the space to glow faintly. What came into view was an endless spatial fault, and from time to time, they would encounter some small, devouring black holes. Although they were small, these black holes were over 100 meters in diameter. The black holes were like the maws of primordial beasts. Their suction force was so strong that they sucked in everything around them. Then, they never appeared again. No one knew where these black holes led to. Yi Zichen carefully avoided the black hole's range and walked through the spatial fault as if treading on thin ice. He's definitely out of his mind. Yi Zichen swallowed another pill, then glanced at the empty bottle. He couldn't help but curse. His curses were naturally directed at Gu Xuanda. After entering the spatial fault, Yi Zichen had reflected on his own mistakes. In truth, the current situation was inextricably linked to him. However, Gu Xuanda was the head of the Gu clan, a major expert. It was said that the prime minister was magnanimous. Gu Xuanda could be considered a local tyrant of the upper plains. Why did he have to be so narrow-minded? Yi Zichen was young and impetuous, but was Gu Xuanda also young and impetuous? If the Upheaval Alliance found out about this, Yi Zichen couldn't guarantee what would happen to the others, but the great sage, Yang Jian, and the others would definitely fight Gu Xuanda to the death. He didn't want to put his friends and family in danger because of him. He had to get out alive. Unfortunately, although that was what Yi Zichen thought, he wasn't very confident. The range of the spatial fault was simply too wide, and the spatial storms here made it even more difficult for him to move. In an hour's time, he hadn't explored much of the spatial fault, but he had consumed quite a lot of medicinal pills. Divine-grade spirit recovery pill. Only a divine-grade alchemist could refine a pill. Although there were many alchemists in the god race, divine-grade alchemists were scarce. Even with old Lord Taishang's skill in alchemy, it would take him at least half a month to produce one batch. There were no more than 7 pills in one cauldron. There was no need to think about the other alchemists. The time spent and the number of cauldrons opened was much longer and much less. Furthermore, it wasn't as if divine-grade pill refiners could only refine one pill. Most of the divine-grade pill refiners in the Upheaval Alliance were refining the pills on the parchment. As a result, even the Upheaval Alliance was in short supply of divine-grade spirit-recovering pills, and they couldn't possibly supply Yi Zichen alone. He didn't have many spiritual recovery pills either. The huge consumption caused Yi Zichen to run out of pills. However, he had plenty of normal spirit-recovering pills. He had plenty of ordinary spirit-recovering pills, but they couldn't keep up with his divine power consumption. Ancient race, you're really something. Yi Zichen angrily put the empty pill bottle back into his spatial divine artifact. Although there were no more pills inside, it was still quite valuable. As the head of the Upheaval Alliance, he had so many subordinates to feed, so he naturally had to live frugally. It was illusory. There was no hope in Yi Zichen's eyes. All he could see was the storm of blades cutting into the barrier. He knew very well that the moment the spirit formation shattered would be the moment he would lose his life in the underworld. There's no cell signal either. Yi Zichen glanced at his phone, then took a deep breath and put it back in his pocket. Yi Zichen stood in the pitch-black void. He didn't know why, but he couldn't help but feel a sense of sorrow and despair. Was he really going to die here? It wasn't as if Yi Zichen had never been in dire straits before. It was just that compared to what he was facing now, they paled in comparison. That wasn't all. He had the Emperor Star's fortune on him. Whenever he was in dire straits, someone would always appear to help him. This time, he hoped someone would appear, but his chances were slim. He didn't think anyone would be so stupid as to jump into a spatial storm for no reason. Little did he know, there really was an idiot in the world who jumped into a spatial rift of his own accord. That person was Gu Xuanda. It wasn't bad that Gu Xuanda was the head of the ancient race. His cultivation was extraordinary, too. He was in control of the ancient race, whose very name struck fear in the hearts of the three realms. Unfortunately, he was a henpecked husband. The second Qing Li glared at him. He'd resolutely and without hesitation ripped open a spatial rift and jumped down. Spatial rifts were random. Even if the spatial rift was a millisecond off, the two of them might be thousands of miles apart. Gu Xuanda had jumped into the rift to search for Yi Zichen, but all he could do was pray that Yi Zichen didn't die in there. His search was like looking for a needle in a haystack. In the blink of an eye, another hour passed. There's still one more bottle. Yi Zichen looked at the pile of empty bottles in his spatial ring and sighed in disappointment. On average, a bottle contained 10 pills. In other words, if Yi Zichen didn't find the exit before he ran out of pills, he'd be stuck here forever. I haven't left any descendants for my family yet. Yi Zichen muttered to himself, but his gaze was sharp as he scanned his surroundings. Any spatial rift had a way out. Even a spatial rift in a different dimension was no exception. He knew this very well, and he clung to that last sliver of hope. Suddenly, a dim, silver light appeared in the pitch-black space. The silver light was very long, like a silver thread cutting through the heavens. Although it was dim, it was still very eye-catching in the pitch-black environment. This was the only abnormal phenomenon Yi Zichen had seen in the spatial rift for a full 2 hours. With practically no hesitation at all, Yi Zichen dashed towards the silver light. He wasn't sure if the silver light was the exit to the fault, but it might be hiding even more dangerous dangers. But he had to go. Chapter 17:23. As Yi Zichen drew closer, he noticed that the silver light was in motion. Fortunately, it wasn't particularly fast. Given Yi Zichen's speed through the spatial storms, he should be able to see its true form in less than an hour. Could there be living creatures in the spatial cracks too? Since it could move, Yi Zichen naturally thought of living creatures. The only thing that made him a little hesitant was that if that silver light really came from a creature, that creature's body was a little too big. At the very least, Yi Zichen couldn't see where the silver light ended. It was as if the silver light had cut through the pitch-black spatial cracks. No matter what the silver light's true form was, Yi Zichen decided to step forward and take a look. He spared no effort in circulating his divine power. While maintaining the barrier's stability, he inched closer and closer to the silver light. 10 minutes passed. During this period of time, something happened that made Yi Zichen want to retreat. The silver light seemed to have sensed him and changed its direction in an attempt to approach him. Yi Zichen had long since suspected it was a living creature, but at the time, he'd wanted to retreat. However, when the silver light drew closer, he realized that it wasn't the living creature he'd imagined. The silver light was still a distance away, but it was no longer a silver thread. Instead, it resembled a long, silver pillar. Yi Zichen could only vaguely make out what seemed like a building. When he got closer to the silver light, he gradually saw the true form of the building. It was a long hallway. Yi Zichen couldn't tell how long it was. At least, as far as he could see, the hallway didn't seem to end. It was about 10 meters tall and entirely silvery white. The silver light he'd seen earlier had come from the building's surface. The raging spatial storms hadn't left a single mark on its silvery surface. This was absolutely good news for Yi Zichen. Maintaining the barrier's stability had consumed too much of his energy. Even with a constant supply of pills and a high level of concentration, he'd still consumed a great deal of his mental energy. What he needed now was a safe haven against the spatial storms, a place where he could recover both his divine power and mental energy. Rest. This hallway was absolutely the perfect place. Yi Zichen didn't hesitate for too long. After confirming that there was no danger in the corridor, he entered it. I'm finally in. When he entered the hallway, Yi Zichen sat on the ground and panted heavily. Speaking of which, this hallway was rather strange. He could enter the entrance, but the storm outside couldn't. The raging spatial storm could only howl outside, but it had no effect on the corridor. The hallway was pitch black. Yi Zichen paced back and forth at the entrance for the time it takes to brew a few cups of tea. There were no decorations or embellishments on the walls. It could be said that it was completely empty. However, as Yi Zichen stood in the hallway, he felt a sense of familiarity. However, he no longer had the energy to think about it. After confirming that the hallway was safe, Yi Zichen's tense nerves finally relaxed. His tense nerves relaxed slightly, and exhaustion surged into his heart like a tidal wave. Yi Zichen took out some wood from his spatial ring and started a bonfire, then leaned against the corner of the wall and sat down. While he felt tired, his eyelids also became heavy. This wasn't good news for Yi Zichen. He knew very well that no matter how exhausted he was, this wasn't the time to rest. At that moment, Yi Zichen, who still had a sliver of consciousness, saw a blur before his eyes. The blur had stopped in front of his bonfire. He did his best to wake himself up, but tiredness washed over him like a tidal wave. It destroyed his last bit of willpower, and he fell into a deep slumber. Just before he fell asleep again, he saw a pair of pitch-black warlock boots slowly approach him. Chaos City. Ever since Chaos City was founded, the Upheaval Alliance had always been wary of the outside. Practically all of the Alliance's higher-ups had their sights set on the outside. Countless Vanguard squads had scouted the outside, but unfortunately, aside from the one they'd killed, the Upheaval Alliance hadn't received any further information. The video Su Lu had criticized had become the only thing they knew about the outside. Sitting in the tall tower, Xiao Yumei held the video she brought back before. She didn't know how many times she'd watched this video, and the technical department had done countless data analysis on the yuan-breaking beast in the video. The results were just as accurate as Su Lu's analysis. If they wanted to know the aura-breaking beast's true strength, they couldn't make an accurate judgment based on this video alone. During this time, the emperors of the Divine Mountains had paid a visit, and they'd all seen the video. Their answers were the same. Xiao Yumei's eyes flashed with exhaustion. In order to share Yi Zichen's burden, she'd taken the initiative to manage the Upheaval Alliance. As the Vice Alliance head, she had far too many things to handle. She had to keep track of the geniuses the Yao and gods had sent into the divine artifact. Zuoria Mo and Old Lord Taishang had to keep up with their pill refinement and construction. The aura-breaking beasts were something she couldn't let go of, and she had to comfort the elemental spirits on the top floor. He's been gone for half a month. Why isn't he back yet? Xiao Yumei looked up at the blue sky outside the tower, her words brimming with longing for Yi Zichen. It wasn't that she wanted Yi Zichen to come back and share her burdens. All she needed was a shoulder to lean on whenever she felt tired. She thought that Yi Zichen's trip to the ancient race would take at least a few days, or at most half a month. Who would have thought that as soon as he left, there would be no news of him? She silently glanced at her phone, then opened her chat window with Yi Zichen. Xiao Yumei's messages were all over the screen, but they were like stones sinking into the ocean. She received no response at all. Managing the company in the modern realm had been tiring, but now she wanted to return to the modern realm and manage the company. She didn't want to spend her days in this chaotic world, burdened by exhaustion. I really don't know when I'll be able to rest. Xiao Yumei quietly set her phone aside and pinched her temples. She wanted to relax, but at that moment, the sound of something piercing through the air rang out outside the tower. Xiao Yumei had just closed her eyes, but when she opened them, she saw Xiao Yin hurriedly rush into the hall. Big sister, Vice Alliance head. Xiao Yumei knit her brows. Chapter 17:24. Xiao Yin had already left the tower before Xiao Yumei's words had even left. Xiao Yumei had no choice but to put her phone in her pocket, then rush to the city gates, her eyes flickering with exhaustion. This was something she had to deal with every day. Chaos City's gates. Xiao Hu and Su Yin stood facing each other. It was obvious that Su Yin was ready to attack, and her divine power of life was leaking out of her. Xiao Hu, on the other hand, knew Su Yin was special, so he could only brace himself and endure. "Please, don't make things difficult for us." Xiao Hu cupped his hands, his tone imploring. Su Yin wasn't from Chaos City, but her relationship with Yi Zichen was an unspoken secret. Xiao Yumei had repeatedly mentioned that she needed to take care of Su Yin. When Xiao Hu learned that Su Yin wanted to go to the outside, he learned this from one of her maids. She wanted to go to the outside? At this moment, the outer realm could be said to be filled with danger everywhere. It was not a place that anyone could go. Su Yin had condensed the god of life's godhead. Her true strength lay in her divine power of life, but her attacks were far weaker than others. At most, they were at the level of a divine general. With such a weak attack method, who could bear the responsibility if something happened to her when she headed to the outer realms? Never mind everything else, just the wrath of a nine-tailed fox clan wasn't something subordinates like them could withstand. Furthermore, if Yi Zichen, the Alliance head, found out, wouldn't he skin them alive? Thus, no matter what, Xiao Hu and the others couldn't let Su Yin leave. Even if they wanted to leave, they'd have to wait until Xiao Yumei arrived. "I'm not making things difficult for you. You're the ones making things difficult for me. I'm not from Chaos City. I'm just staying here for a few days. I want to go back to the Fox clan. What right do you have to stop me?" Even though she was angry, Su Yan's tone was still gentle. However, he could sense her anxiety from her eyes. Otherwise, she wouldn't have mobilized all the divine power in her body. "Don't joke around. If you want to go back to the Fox clan, we naturally won't stop you. In fact, we'll send people to escort you back. It's just that you're going to the outside, and the outside is extremely dangerous. How could we dare let you go there? How about this? Please don't be impatient. Our steward is all ready. She want to look for Deputy Chief Xiao. When she arrives, what do you think?" Xiao Hu smiled apologetically. "Get out of the way," Su Yin shouted as she bit her lips. "Little Yin." At that moment, Xiao Yumei hurried over from the tower. The surrounding upheaval alliance members bowed deeply to her. "Vice Guild Master, you guys go back to work. I'll take care of this." Hearing this, the members left one after another. At this time, Xiao Yumei also walked over to Su Yin. "Sister, what's wrong with you? Why do you suddenly want to go to the outer realms?" "Sister Yumei," Suddenly, Xiao Yumei's expression froze. Less than half a breath later, she called out to Xiao Yin and Xiao Hu, who hadn't gotten far yet. "Xiao Yin, Xiao Hu, summon all the Alliance elders to the tower for a meeting." In a long corridor, Yi Zichen leaned against the wall and tilted his head, while a myriad of emotions flashed across his face. He really had fallen asleep, and he was sound asleep. During this time, he'd had an extremely strange dream, so strange that he didn't know what it was trying to convey. In his dreams, he always felt a pair of hands constantly caressing his chest, and from time to time, they would also touch his arms and legs. Fire! Suddenly, a shout reached Yi Zichen's ears, and his dream really did turn into a sea of fire. Fire, fire! Yi Zichen muttered to himself as he jolted awake. Then he sensed someone touching his chest. "You're awake?" The person touching his chest smiled kindly. Yi Zichen looked down and saw a pair of slightly deformed hands on his chest. He looked up and saw a huge head. What was even stranger was that the head's eyes were ridiculously large. They practically took up the entire head's entire head. They practically took up a quarter of the head. F***. Yi Zichen kicked the alien aside, shot to his feet, and examined his body repeatedly. "You really aren't friendly." After all, Yi Zichen was a divine general expert. He didn't dare claim to be particularly strong, but he wasn't someone ordinary people could withstand. He didn't have any strength left in his kick just now. But the alien, who took a solid kick, didn't seem to be injured at all. The alien merely patted off the dust on its body, then walked towards Yi Zichen once again. "Stop right there." Yi Zichen glared at the alien, then drew the Xinyuan sword and pointed it forward. "What kind of Yao are you? Let me tell you, the great sage equal to heaven and the great monster-slaying emperor is my sworn brother. If you take another step forward, my brother will smash your head in." The alien really did stop. Yi Zichen licked his lips and asked, "What were you touching my body just now? You really aren't friendly, kid. Just now I noticed your blood flow was a bit clogged, so I helped you clear it. It's fine if you don't appreciate it, but you even kicked me," said the alien. "Is that so? In that case, I have to thank you." Yi Zichen examined his body. After confirming that there were no problems, he stuck to the wall and pointed the Xin Yuan sword at the alien. "Then what you do? Me? We haven't seen each other for long. Have you forgotten already?" The alien chuckled. "Ordinary people rarely get to visit me even once in their entire lives. You're pretty lucky. You come twice. But this time, it seems you ran into some sort of trouble before coming here. You?" When he heard the alien's words, Yi Zichen instinctively wiped his eyes, then looked around in astonishment. No wonder he'd felt so familiar when he first entered. This was the time corridor. The last time he'd entered the time corridor, he'd encountered it on his way from the Fox clan to the lower realms. At the time corridor was still in the main dimension. How had it mysteriously ended up in a subdimension? The location of the time corridor is unpredictable. That's why running into it even once is a blessing from the heavens. The alien seemed to have read Yi Zichen's thoughts. He chuckled. Yi Zichen licked his lips and pointed at the alien, who was only 4 meters tall and strangely shaped. "Then aren't you?" Chapter 1725. That familiar tone, that familiar action. Yi Zichen looked at the arrogant dwarf. He hadn't guessed it would really be him. To be able to meet an old friend in such a harsh environment was really something to be excited about. However, Yi Zichen quickly wiped his surprise away, raised his hand, and slapped the dwarf on the head. "You'd better shut up." Yi Zichen absolutely wasn't angry. This was just his way of greeting the dwarf. Yi Zichen was certain that if he remembered their first meeting, the dwarf would definitely reminisce about that familiar feeling and that familiar slap. It felt just like before, just as painful. Yi Zichen looked at his reddened palm and recalled that familiar sensation. He couldn't help but reminisce. "You? How rude." The dwarf glared at him and roared. He was the great demon Pilar. Demons reigned supreme over all other races. How could he allow someone to touch the back of his noble head? However, with his appearance and height, even when he was angry, he still looked comical. Threatening? That didn't exist at all. "I'll look at you. Why are you so angry? I'm just saying hello to you." Yi Zichen chuckled and patted him on the shoulder. "Don't tell me that slap just now didn't give you the slightest sense of familiarity?" Familiarity. The dwarf pursed his lips and muttered to himself for a moment. He really did feel a bit familiar. "Oomph. The great Mr. Pilar will let you off this time." "No problem, Shorty. Call me the great Mr. Pilar or Lord Demon." "No problem, Shorty." In front of the bonfire, Yi Zichen and Pilar sat against opposite walls. From the entrance, they could still see the raging storm outside. Pilar wanted to resist when Yi Zichen called him Shorty, but Yi Zichen ignored his attempts. In the end, he could only let Yi Zichen call him that. However, he still repeated that he was the great demon. "Shorty, call me the great Mr. Pilar or Lord Demon." Pilar was furious, but he couldn't beat Yi Zichen in martial arts. He could only sulk. "What? The time corridor is moving, right? When will we be able to leave this place?" The great Pilar doesn't know. Yi Zichen couldn't help but slap Pilar's head from afar. Pilar was infuriated, but when he looked at this powerful guy with no sense of propriety, all he could do was silently urge himself not to bicker with him. Pilar swore that if Yi Zichen dared act so impudently in his kingdom, he'd definitely pay the price. "Hey, you're quite an interesting fellow." Yi Zichen leaned against the wall and grinned at Pilar. "You're clearly just a little dwarf with no magical power, yet you insist on calling yourself a lord and calling yourself a demon. The great Pilar is a devil. Is that so? Why didn't the great Mr. Devil have the slightest bit of demonic energy? When I was reading in the modern realm, the demon race was one of the most powerful races, almost comparable to the god race. Huh, how can the despicable god race compare to our demon race?" At the mention of the extraterritorial celestial race, Pilar spat out. Yi Zichen saw thick hatred in his eyes. It was obvious he knew about the god race, and he'd held a grudge against them for a long time. His hateful gaze made it seem as if he wanted to skin the gods alive. I get the feeling you have a story with the god race. Do you want to tell me? Why would the great Pilar tell a low-level creature like you about such things? Snorted Pilar. Yizichin raised his hand, and Pilar hurriedly covered the back of his head. His expression was as comical as it could be. Yizichin laughed, then lowered his hand. All right then. A low-level creature like me shouldn't provoke the great Mr. Devil. At least you know what's good for you. Pilar forced himself to snort coldly, but he'd forgotten how he'd reacted to Yizichin, a low-level creature, with just a wave of his hand. Hey! After a long moment of silence, Pilar suddenly waved at Yizichin. Yizichin glanced at him, then saw Pilar licking his lips and muttering to himself, as if he found it difficult to speak. Do you have any food for the great devil? What? Yizichin froze. Although Pilar's voice was soft, Yizichin heard him clearly. Yizichin was astonished that Pilar actually needed to eat. In truth, Yizichin truly believed that this guy was a demon. To the outside world, demons were the symbol of evil. Only a true demon like him, or a half-baked demon who was working hard to become one, would talk about them all the time. He was rather surprised that a dignified demon could actually eat food. Pilar's face flushed red, but he gnashed his teeth and glared at Yizichin viciously. The Great Pilar wants some food from you. Don't worry, the Great Pilar will definitely make it up to you in the future. We're already so familiar with each other, so there's no need to keep putting on airs. No matter what you say, in my heart, you're just a dwarf, aren't you? Yizichin sighed and laughed. How about this? Let's call each other the same. You call me Big Bro, and I'll call you Little Bro, and I'll give you food. The Great Pilar can't accept such an insult. Then you could just go hungry. With that, Yizichin pulled a few slices of ham and bread from his spatial ring. In truth, he wasn't hungry at all. He'd only done this in order to entice the dwarf. The instant the food appeared, Pilar's mouth watered like a tidal wave. All right, the Great Pilar agrees to your request. Hey, that won't do. Do you remember what I said just now? Yizichin laughed. Of course Pilar remembered, but calling a human from the lower realms Big Bro, Big Bro, please give your little brother some food. Pilar raised his hands above his head, his eyes filled with sincerity and entreaty. Yizichin smiled, then tossed the bread and ham at him. It was obvious that Pilar was starving. He devoured the bread and 2 slices of ham in no time. You humans really know how to enjoy life. Chapter 1726. Pilar's blissful smile gradually faded from his face. He stopped sucking on the cream on his fingers. Even as he neared the fire, he retreated half a meter. When he looked at Yizichin, his eyes brimmed with undisguised vigilance. As expected, something was wrong. When he saw this, Yizichin was even more certain of his suspicions. They'd only met by chance, and they'd never had a deep conversation. There was no way Pilar was drooling over Yizichin's food. That was why he'd asked Yizichin for food. He really was hungry. Ordinary cultivators, even spiritual bodies, could abstain from eating. Pilar was a dwarf. Although he was unbearably ugly, he couldn't deny the fact that he was a cultivator. Yizichin didn't dare say he was an emperor, but he was at least a supreme. For someone at that level to need to eat was too laughable. Yizichin thought back to when he'd just woken up. His kick had landed squarely on Pilar's body. Yizichin hadn't sensed any divine power obstructing his kick. Pilar hadn't released any divine power during his fall, either. There was only one possibility. He didn't have any divine power at all. All he had was a strong body. Judging from Pilar's state, he was clearly on high alert. Even if Yizichin asked, he wouldn't tell him anything about himself. Yizichin chuckled, then decided not to pursue the matter. He took some meat out of his spatial ring, built a rack in front of the fire, and roasted some meat. His understanding of the Tao of the 5 elements had not only strengthened Yizichin's elemental attacks, but had also improved his control over fire. He controlled the flames and cooked the meat until it was golden brown. Juices dripped from the meat onto the fire, creating a melodious sound. He sprinkled seasoning, and a gentle breeze blew through the hallway, bringing the meat's fragrance to Pilar's nose. When Pilar smelled the roasted meat, His expression changed visibly, and he gulped. Yi Zichen could see it all clearly. Yi Zichen smiled, tore open the meat, and tossed it into his mouth. Hey! When he saw this, Pilar finally couldn't help but shout at Yi Zichen. Yi Zichen deliberately covered his mouth with grease, then secretly manipulated the breeze to send the fragrance to Pilar. What is it? Yi Zichen pretended not to know. What are you eating? Pilar pointed at the roasted meat on the grill, and when his eyes fell on it, he couldn't take his eyes off it. Barbecued meat. Do you want some? It tastes pretty good. As soon as he finished, Pilar's stomach started growling. Yi Zichen simply smiled, then used his divine power to drag a piece of roasted meat over to Pilar. He had long been tempted by the roast meat, or maybe the butter bread from before was not enough to satisfy his hunger. Without the slightest hesitation, Pilar stuffed the roasted meat into his mouth without caring about how hot it was. At that moment, Yi Zichen stopped eating. Instead, he focused on serving Pilar. Whenever Pilar ran out of meat, Yi Zichen would bring him another piece. That was Yi Zichen's plan. If he wanted to lower someone's guard, eating good food was one of the simplest and most direct methods. He wanted to use this method to get Pilar to lower his guard and tell him everything he'd experienced. Of course, it would be even better if Pilar told him himself. This absolutely wasn't a waste of time. At least, from Yi Zichen's point of view, this was absolutely useful information. The evil demon race, a high-level race, seemed to have some connections with the god race. Yi Zichen couldn't help but marvel at Pilar's appetite. Pilar was only around 3 meters tall, but he'd eaten nearly 10 kilograms of beef, yet that hadn't even filled his seemingly bottomless stomach. But that made sense. A powerful body naturally required a large appetite to satisfy its consumption. Pilar had no divine power at all, yet he'd been able to withstand Yi Zichen's kick. Another few chunks of beef entered his stomach. That's enough. I'm full. Pilar patted his round belly. Only now did he truly smile in satisfaction. Yi Zichen stopped. He put away the grill and seasoning, then sat in front of the fire in silence. Hey! Pilar lay lazily in front of the fire and smiled inexplicably. He looked at Yi Zichen with his large eyes, and the corners of his oily lips curled up into a smile. You're very smart. Without waiting for Yi Zichen's response, he wiped his mouth and licked his fingers. You know I'm wary of you, so you won't say a word about what happened before. Instead, you're tempting me with food. That's not a bad idea, but bang! Before Pilar could finish, Yi Zichen slapped him hard on the back of the head. This slap almost stunned Pilar. He stared with his eyes wide open, unable to say a word for a long time. Don't think too highly of yourself, kid. You're my little bro, and as your big brother, I can't bear to see my little bro suffer. I saw you weren't full, so I intentionally made you some more food. Don't put on airs. You need to be clear about who's the big brother and who's the little bro, said Yi Zichen. Pilar glared at him. That's how it is. Pilar is here to thank you. This time, Pilar wasn't angry. He rubbed the back of his head, which hurt a little, then bowed deeply to Yi Zichen, a smile tugging at his lips. You're the Emperor Star of the Third Era, aren't you? So you know that, joked Yi Zichen. What do you think? Being the Emperor Star's little bro isn't bad, is it? Of course. Pilar nodded. Those who can enter the time corridor are those who have transcended fate or the brilliance of the Emperor Star. You made it here twice. Only the Emperor Star has such a heaven-defying fate. Transcended fate and the light of the Emperor Star. Suddenly, Yi Zichen's expression darkened. If I remember correctly, Zhou Wu came here before. Doesn't that mean he's fated to transcend? Zhou Wu? There's no point in telling me this. I've never remembered the names of those who come here. Pilar lazily lay back down in front of the fire. His words betrayed his arrogance. Yi Zichen ignored him. He just wanted to get one thing straight. Chapter 17:27. Who was telling the truth? Yi Zichen vaguely recalled someone once telling him that Zhou Wu wasn't fated to transcend. Ever since then, he had always believed in this. Even though he could not remember who had told him this, the conviction in his heart also reflected the person who had told him this, and he had absolute trust in him. Countless emperors entered the Transcendence Mausoleum. Zhou Wu was the only one who couldn't take even half a step inside. Pilar, on the other hand, said that entering the time corridor meant he had transcended. Of course, when Pilar said he'd entered the time corridor, it meant he had either transcended or had celestial fate. Yi Zichen heard him clearly. The reason he'd concluded Zhou Wu was fated to transcend was because, before entering the time corridor, he didn't have celestial fate. When Yi Zichen first entered the time corridor, he'd seen the image of the bonfire. He still remembered it clearly. Zhou Wu had traded his heart for the five elements' great emperor's celestial fate. Are you sure? Since Yi Zichen had complete faith in the man who'd told him Zhou Wu hadn't transcended fate, Pilar, who had a completely different theory, wasn't worth trusting. Between the two of them, Yi Zichen naturally had to suspect Pilar. Suspicion appeared in Yi Zichen's eyes and didn't fade. Pilar, who'd maintained his arrogant expression, lifted his chin and noticed Yi Zichen's suspicion. It was like gunpowder had been ignited, and it exploded with a bang. What's with that look? Don't tell me you doubt my words. Well, why do you have to look at me like that? Do you think I'm lying to you? Pilar directly asked 3 questions in a row, not giving Yi Zichen a chance to interject. After the first 3 questions, he went back to his own business. Your suspicion is the greatest insult to me. You can insult me, but you can't insult the great time corridor. This time corridor was built by our demon king. Those who are not of the demon race must have transcended fate or emperor celestial providence. This is the law left behind by the great demon king. You dare doubt the great demon king? I'll fight you to the death. Bang! Pilar swung his arms and lunged at Yi Zichen, but before he could take more than a few steps, he was kicked several meters away. When he landed on the ground, he didn't hesitate at all. He immediately flipped over and jumped up, then swung his fist towards Yi Zichen. This time, Yi Zichen didn't kick and punch him. Instead, he reached out and placed a hand on Pilar's head. Yi Zichen, who'd used his divine power, made it impossible for Pilar to take even half a step forward. Pilar's height and arm length were so different that all he could do was swing his fists in place. He couldn't even touch the hem of Yi Zichen's clothes. Calm down. I have no intention of doubting your great devil king. But you doubted me just now? That's the same as doubting the great devil king. Pilar said, why do you say that? Since that's the great devil king, what right do you have to replace him? Don't you think that's the real disrespect to the devil king? What do you mean replace him? I'm this generation's devil king, the great Lord Pilar. So that's how it is. When he heard Pilar's words, Yi Zichen didn't seem surprised in the slightest. Instead, it was as if he'd learned exactly what Pilar wanted to hear. He removed his hand from Pilar's head and took a few steps back. I sincerely apologize for my earlier slip of the tongue. Yes, the great devil king. Mr. Pilar, after the destruction of the First Era, Yi Zichen had taken in quite a few of its experts. Not only had they brought with them the 10th Divine Mountain, but they'd also brought all sorts of resources, including quite a few ancient tomes. One of them, written in human language, had once mentioned Pilar, which meant great devil. Just now, Yi Zichen suddenly recalled this, which led to the rest of their conversation. The ugly shorty before him was the current king of the demon race, as well as the greatest devil king of the demon race. In the demon race, a devil king wasn't just a high level of cultivation. It was a form of address, but also a symbol of status. Every generation of the Fiend clan would have a Fiend king. When this Fiend king died, the Fiend clan would give birth to a new Fiend king. This Fiend king would be protected by the entire Fiend clan, given time and resources to grow until he could stand on his own. This was all because of the first Devil King's words. Only a Devil King could lead the demon race into a prosperous future. From then on, the demon race regarded this as a motto. At the end of the day, the demon race was a superior race, just like the gods of the outside. Even in the ancient tomes of the First Era, when they transcended, there were only a few brief mentions of the demon race. It was very shallow. Yi Zichen had no direct understanding of the demon race's cultivation. However, he clearly remembered that, as soon as a demon was born, they were all divine generals. They could become emperors at a young age. then choose to become either a demon or a warlock. There were many paths for the demon race to choose from. This was similar to the gods of the outside. They were born as trainee gods, then became lesser gods at a young age. After that, they could choose to become angels, knights, or strengthen their godheads to become overgods. It was clear that a superior race was superior. From the moment their clansmen were born, it was clear how different humans were from them. For gods, Yao, and demons, their only path was to become cultivators and transcend step by step. The demons and gods of the outside, on the other hand, could choose any path they wanted. Once they found the most suitable path, they could consider their future development. Pilar was this generation's Devil King. Countless demons had placed their hopes on him, and they'd done everything in their power to pave the way for him. Based on his powerful body, it was clear that the demons had spent far too much money on him. But as the Devil King, he'd been abandoned in the passage of time, all alone and destitute. There wasn't a single guard in sight, and he couldn't sense any of his demonic energy. Yizichin refused to believe he hadn't experienced some sort of disaster. "You're trying to trick me." Pilar's gaze darkened. "You knew all along that I was the Devil King. You know about the demons, and you're a god of the outside." When he mentioned the gods, Pilar's eyes flashed with scarlet. Although he didn't have any demonic energy, he still radiated the aura of a Devil King. Chapter 17:28. Yizichin's smile faded, and he took a few steps back. He'd done enough testing. Now that he knew Pilar was the Demon King, Yizichin had achieved his goal. What he needed to do now was dispel Pilar's apprehensions and make him truly lower his guard. "Almighty Demon King, I absolutely had no intention of prying into your secrets." Yizichin intentionally referred to Pilar as the Demon King, raising his status. His lips curved into a refreshing smile. "If you can calm down and think about it, you'll realize that you were the one who revealed the Demon King's identity in the heat of the moment. It had nothing to do with me. If that's the case, how can you say I try to trick you into revealing the truth? Eloquence is an innate gift you humans possess." Pilar's gaze was deep, but he still didn't look friendly when he looked at Yizichin. "You can say that." Yizichin had no desire to defend himself against Pilar's slander. The way he saw it, this wasn't the time for excuses. All he'd done was probe Pilar a few times, and he'd gotten Pilar to reveal some shocking truths. Although Yizichin had dug a few holes in Pilar's words, none of them were fatal. Pilar knew this as well. Besides, even if he was truly angry, he had no demonic power at all. All he had was his physical body. There was no way he could do anything to Yizichin. It could be said that even if Pilar was angry, from the moment Yizichin entered the time corridor, Yizichin was already in control of the situation. Yizichin wouldn't put himself on a pedestal just because he was stronger than Pilar. Even if Yizichin really wanted to, given Pilar's dignity as the Demon King, he'd rather die than become someone's prisoner. He wanted a win-win situation, not a slave. "Almighty Demon King, you really don't need to do this. I'm sure you know that our third era is in the middle of a whirlpool of trouble," said Yizichin. "Did the Outer Realm God race attack you?" Pilar asked calmly. "See, you really do know." Yizichin laughed, but his gaze instantly sharpened. "The outsiders haven't attacked us yet, but they've already begun probing us. Not long ago, I sent out a few advanced squads, but they were attacked by origin-shattering beasts. He survived. Only one video was sent to us by one of the members using a secret technique." "Video?" Pilar was stunned. The term was new to him. "It's just an image." Yizichin gave a brief explanation, then brought the conversation back on track. "A full 100. I've never had so many subordinates die in Chaos City. These are all my elite subordinates. Their deaths can be described by others as sacrificial sacrifices. Yes, he's a hero, but not with me." "What do you mean?" Pilar seemed interested. "I will avenge them." Yizichin's voice was sonorous and forceful. From the aura emanating from his body, it was clear that he'd spoken from the bottom of his heart. Revenge. The moment Yizichin saw the video, he already had that thought in mind. It didn't matter how emotional the general had been, or how Su Luer had coldly attacked him. None of this could elevate or diminish the status of the advance party in Yi Zichen's heart. They had indeed died for the sake of the Third Era. There was nothing wrong with that. If they hadn't gone to the outside for the sake of the Third Era, they wouldn't have been ambushed by the aura-breaking beasts. It was only natural to treat their families well, but they couldn't just sacrifice themselves for nothing. In that case, all Yi Zichen could do for them was avenge them. Only the blood of the outsiders and the corpses of the aura-breaking beasts could be used as a sacrifice to their souls. He silently looked at Yi Zichen's solemn expression, but before long, it disappeared and was replaced with a relaxed smile. Pilar could tell that he wasn't really smiling. He was just hiding his solemn expression. "Hey, I might have said a bit too much," laughed Yi Zichen. "It's fine. I don't particularly mind." Pilar smiled kindly. Suddenly, Yi Zichen reached his hand out. Pilar was baffled. He didn't understand why Yi Zichen would do something like this. "In truth, I've said so much because I wanted to tell you, Lord Pilar, the outsiders are the Third Era's enemies, and they're also my enemies. In that case, how about Lord Pilar work together with the Third Era?" Pilar furrowed his brows. Yi Zichen pressed his lips into a smile. "If I'm not mistaken, the reason you ended up in this situation, hiding your identity in the time corridor, is inextricably linked to the outsiders. In that case, why can't we work together? There are mutual enemies, aren't they?" Hiding his identity, Pilar had to admit that the human race's vocabulary was vast and profound. It was just the right word for him. The Demon King was Pilar's true identity, one he'd always carefully concealed. While he'd hidden it, it was also the heaviest pain in his heart. The Demon King hadn't just brought him glory, respect, and the attention of millions. It had also placed a heavy responsibility on his shoulders. He'd received his race's protection, and in the future, he'd appeared when his race was in danger. He'd ensured that the demons lived on forever. However, the current situation proved that. He'd failed. It was fair to say that he'd utterly failed. He'd failed to shoulder the responsibility of protecting his race. And even in the final moments, his race had done everything in their power to protect him. In the end, they'd left him in the time corridor. Work together? For some reason, Pilar inexplicably recalled something Yi Zichen had said, even if it didn't really fit the current situation. "As your big brother, I can't bear to see my little brother suffer." Yi Zichen had said this to Pilar, but in this situation, all he'd said was to emphasize his words a bit more. His subordinates had sacrificed themselves for the new era. There was nothing he could do for them. All he could do was avenge them. This was a sign of their sense of responsibility. Although Yi Zichen said they were elites, they were absolutely true elites. They'd been sent to the outside to investigate the god race. As the Demon King, he was well-versed in the management of his faction. Scouting missions like this couldn't be left to the higher-ups. Only the true elites of the clan would go. Most of the people sent to such dangerous places were expendable, insignificant characters. Even if they really died, there wouldn't be any changes in the clan because of this. To them, it didn't matter at all. If they could bring back some information, that was good, but if they couldn't, then so be it. For the sake of the clan, and more importantly, for the sake of the new era, like Yi Zichen, their sacrifices were inevitable. Chapter 1729. The time corridor's bonfire blazed brighter and brighter. The fiery red light illuminated the faces of Yi Zichen and Pilar, who stood before the bonfire, and their faces reddened. Yi Zichen's hand remained suspended in midair. Pilar didn't respond. However, he could tell that the Demon King was hesitant, so he wasn't in a hurry. He quietly retracted his hand and waited for Pilar to make a decision. In truth, Pilar wasn't hiding his emotions. He really was hesitating. From the moment Yi Zichen entered the time corridor and Pilar decided to meet him, he wanted to work with Yi Zichen. His hatred for the outsiders was far deeper than Yi Zichen's. Pilar was keenly aware of his current situation. Overthrowing a colossus like the god race was nothing more than a pipe dream. He needed external help. As the Third Era's Emperor Star, Yi Zichen had the fortune to enter the time corridor twice. To him, Yi Zichen was the perfect partner. He didn't directly agree because he didn't want to show how desperate he was. He also wanted to understand Yi Zichen a little better. After all, They'd only met twice, and the first time they met, Yi Zichen hadn't given him a particularly good impression. He'd stolen the demon race's prized possession, the devil Dharma body. Just now, Yi Zichen's display of his true feelings had moved Pilar somewhat, but only slightly. Right now, he needed to understand Yi Zichen in many ways. At the very least, he needed a shallow understanding of his character. Pilar was already standing at the edge of cliff. He had no way out, and he couldn't afford to fail. Pilar took a deep breath, then glanced at Yi Zichen. We can consider working together, but right now, cooperation isn't the problem we need to solve the most. Getting out of here is our top priority. I won't hide it from you. I trust you've sensed it too. I don't have any demonic energy on me. I'm only protected by the time corridor, but I can no longer control it. Honesty was a good thing. Pilar's words didn't seem like a good thing at the moment. Without demonic energy, he couldn't control the time corridor, and there was no way he could leave the time corridor through the dimensional rift. Even so, he didn't have any demonic energy. It was a secret, but Pilar still said it. His honesty meant that he was gradually dropping his guard against Yi Zichen. Yi Zichen merely smiled at the question of how to leave the subdimension. Suddenly, the bonfire in the corridor burned brighter and brighter. The flames were like countless fiery snakes, threatening to swallow them whole. At this moment, a loud cry came from the bonfire. The flames of the bonfire splashed around them, and at the same time, a blazing bird appeared in their field of vision. The scorching heat wave baked the time corridor into a fiery red iron plate. Pilar, who was sitting on the ground, suddenly had a feeling. It was as if he had become the delicious barbecue Yi Zichen had given him. However, the heat didn't last long. Pilar saw Yi Zichen place a barrier around him. You really are courting death. The fierce bird on the bonfire spat out a mantra. The biting coldness in his mouth formed a strong contrast with his heat. This isn't your summoned creature? The bird's words stunned Pilar. He and Yi Zichen were the only ones in the time corridor. Pilar was certain of this. Without demonic energy, he couldn't even control the time corridor, much less summon a creature. Only Yi Zichen could. But why did this bird seem to have such a bad temper? Was it because of his fire attribute? Generally speaking, fire attribute creatures had fiery tempers. You'd better shut up. Before Pilar could respond, Yi Zichen glared at him in exasperation. A summoned creature? In truth, calling the bird a summoned creature wasn't wrong. It was one of the 3 Yao emperors of the Yao Ceiling Pagoda. However, couldn't Pilar tell that the bird looked like it wanted to eat Yi Zichen alive? And he dared call it a summoned creature? He really wasn't afraid of death. Back in the Yao Ceiling Pagoda, he'd try to kill his master. Yi Zichen didn't dare provoke him. Summoning him was Qinglan's idea. After entering the time corridor, Yi Zichen had extra divine power to communicate with the Yao Ceiling Pagoda. Qinglan had recommended the bird, and she convinced it to help. The bird had come out, but it had a terrible temper. When he saw that Yi Zichen's emotions weren't too stable, and the blazing bird looked like it was about to devour him, Pilar considered the fact that he had no demonic energy at all, so he obediently shut his mouth and said no more. Boss, don't be angry. Uncle Lon said that if I wanted to help you find it, I needed a fire. As you can see, I'm in pretty bad shape right now. I used all my strength to make a bonfire. Yi Zichen smiled apologetically. I know this bonfire is a bit embarrassing for you, but I had no choice. Oomph. The fierce bird coldly snorted, and with a shake of its body, it transformed into a handsome man with sharp eyes. I really don't know what's so good about you, kid. Even Qinglan and Song Xiong, that brainless bastard, spoke up for you. Song Xiong had spoken up too? Yi Zichen made a mental note of this. When he had time, he'd have to properly reward him when he entered the Yao Ceiling Pagoda. However, right now, all he could do was smile apologetically. I really don't understand why you're the Emperor Star of this era. You don't have the slightest sense of maturity. You're just like a street kid, slandered the bird mercilessly. Pilar, who was inside the barrier, widened his eyes at the scene before him. This bird was supposed to be Yi Zichen's summoned creature, right? Why did it feel like he was the master? If this were the demons, their masters would have killed this summoned creature long ago. Yi Zichen really had a good temper. This or a partner. Bonus points. Yizichin had no idea that this situation would actually earn him extra points in Pilar's heart. All he could think about now was, I have to endure. Yizichin stood in front of the bonfire. He couldn't help but remind himself that if he wanted to get out of here, he'd have to rely on this guy Qinglan had recommended. It really was strange. The Yao emperors of the Yao Ceiling Pagoda were each worse than the last. Song Xiong had gone to great lengths to convince Yizichin to give him peach juice, but this bird's temper was even worse than his. He really wasn't easy to get along with. Even so, he still had to force a smile on his face and attach himself to her. Chapter 1730. Raging flames burn the heavens. Within the pitch-black vault of the dimensional space where the spatial storm was raging, all that was reflected in his eyes was a sea of blood red. Yizichin and Pilar hadn't stayed in the time corridor. Instead, they followed the bird into the storm. Only now, when Yizichin saw the fiery sky, did he truly see what pure fire was. There were no impurities whatsoever. Everything he saw was scarlet. Even Yizichin, who'd cultivated the Tao of the 5 elements to the pinnacle of fire, couldn't compare. The raging waves of heat forced the spatial storm out of the way of the spatial storm. Wherever the flames reached, there was practically nothing left of it. Roar! All of a sudden, the flaming bird that had transformed into a human body in the void suddenly let out a strange cry. Soon after, with him as the center, the surroundings of his body abruptly burned with scorching but pure white flames. Next, he stomped into the air, and a red lotus of fire appeared beneath his feet. The fiery lotus carried him forward and turned the area where his flame was burning into a vacuum space, completely blocking the space storm and the fall turbulence. What's he doing? Yizichin couldn't help but mutter to himself as he watched the blazing bird charge forward. Yizichin had asked him to come here in order to break through the spatial fault and find the exit. However, judging from his expression, he had no intention of looking for a way out. Rather, he wanted to use the most direct method, use his flames to burn a path out. This showed that he was supremely confident in his own strength. Yizichin just didn't know if his confidence was just a form of arrogance. Pilar had been paying close attention to the bird's movements. He had no choice but to do so. Whether or not they could leave this spatial fault was closely related to him. Yizichin's whisper naturally reached his ears, but before he could say anything, his eyes widened. Even for a demon king like him, this sort of terror was enough to make him lose his composure. Hey, your friend over there, did he go the wrong place? As Pilar panicked, Yizichin, who'd been paying close attention to the bird, naturally saw where he'd gone. There was a huge black hole right in front of him. Its powerful suction force seemed to want to swallow everything around it into its black hole. Yizichin had a rather clear impression of the black hole. He'd seen it before when he'd first entered the subdimension. The reason why Yizichin cared so much about it was because it was the largest black hole he'd ever seen. If he remembered correctly, when he saw this black hole, there were many smaller black holes around it. But at this moment, those small black holes had long since disappeared. If there were no accidents, they should have been swallowed by this huge black hole. Suddenly, Yizichin saw that there really were a few smaller black holes around the giant one. They were struggling to hold on as the giant one swallowed them whole. This further confirmed Yizichin's suspicions. It had devoured the black hole. Black hole swallowing black hole. One had to know that a single black hole was a huge threat to explorers. Even if it was the smallest black hole, an Imperial Realm expert would have to be careful and avoid it. They wouldn't dare to fight it. Even monarchs and emperors wouldn't dare to approach this enormous black hole that could swallow other small and medium-sized black holes. But this bird, suddenly, Yizichin recalled that, as soon as he'd entered the 4th floor of the Yao Ceiling Pagoda, the bird had tried to kill him. Fortunately, Qinglan had intervened and stabilized the situation. This wasn't the Yao Ceiling Pagoda, and Qinglan wasn't by his side. Could it be that he wanted to? You're crazy, but we won't go crazy with you. Pilar, let's go. Yizichin was about to turn around and head back the way they'd come, but to his surprise, Pilar stopped. We can't go back. The passage collapsed long ago. Yizichin looked ahead. Sure enough, without the bird's flames, The passage had long since collapsed. Spatial storms had taken over the surrounding space. In truth, Yi Zichen could endure this sort of storm. Before entering the time corridor, he'd endured it bit by bit. However, now there was Pilar. He didn't have any demonic power. To put it nicely, he had a strong body, but to put it bluntly, he was half crippled. Yi Zichen had to expend a great deal of effort just to pass through. If he brought Pilar along, I really have to give it to you. Yi Zichen sighed resentfully. Retreating was out of the question. Even if he could leave, he couldn't just leave Pilar behind. He had no choice but to bite the bullet and follow the bird forward. He watched as Pilar and Yi Zichen drew closer and closer to the black hole. Damn it, there's no enmity between us. There's no enmity between us. So why are you making things so difficult for me? The black hole drew closer and closer. Even Yi Zichen and company, who were standing in a vacuum of the flames, could feel the black hole's powerful suction force. Flamingo continued to walk at the very front, using his pure flames to fight against the suction force of the black hole. At that moment, Flamingo turned around in response to Yi Zichen's earlier words. "Did I tell you to follow me?" snorted Flamingo. "No, don't say that. Since you promised Uncle Lon and the others, you should take me out of here. No matter what you think of me or what grievances you have, we can settle them once we're out of here. What's the point of sulking?" "Sulking?" laughed Flamingo. "You really think too highly of yourself. If this isn't sulking, then what is? There's such a massive black hole up ahead. Can't you see it? If you're afraid, then just go back." As soon as it finished speaking, Flamingo charged towards the black hole without even turning its head back. Yi Zichen clenched his fists, gnashed his teeth, and said nothing. Pilar spoke up as well. "Trust him. Trust him. No matter who saw it, Flamingo's actions were suicidal. Such a massive black hole could swallow up even a small one. If they went in, they wouldn't even be enough to fill the gaps between its teeth. But given the current situation, they had no choice but to try their luck. They couldn't retreat. All they could hope for was that Flamingo wasn't suicidal. He really did have a way to break through the black hole. However, the chances of that happening were minuscule. Whoosh! Just as Zichen was starting to get worried, a wave of scorching flames completely canceled out the black hole's suction and spatial storms. Their field of vision was filled with a dazzling, fiery red. Pilar froze, and so did Yi Zichen, because in front of them they saw a dazzling sun. Chapter 17:31. The desolate wilderness was covered in white as far as the eye could see. It was obvious that this was a snowy mountain. Bright sunlight shone on the snow, causing the ice and snow to sparkle. Yi Zichen stood in the snow. His black robes were especially eye-catching in the pure white. His expression wasn't too good. He looked to the north with a dark expression. How lucky! They'd emerged from the subdimension rift, but the unruly, three-legged golden crow didn't give him a good look. It really is. Yi Zichen looked in the direction the three-legged crow had left. The crow had transformed into a blazing sun and burned away the black hole, opening up a spatial passageway. Yi Zichen's heart was filled with the joy of surviving a calamity, as well as gratitude. He'd wanted to thank him properly once he'd emerged, but he hadn't expected the crow to scowl at him, as if someone had stolen his treasure. Yi Zichen asked himself if he'd ever offended the crow. He really couldn't understand why this guy was so hostile towards him. Fortunately, the three-legged golden crow was rational and hadn't attacked him. It was just verbal mockery, and nothing else was out of line. But even though Yi Zichen resented the three-legged golden crow, he still remembered this favor. When the opportunity presented itself, he'd definitely repay it. At his level, it was impossible for him to return a favor with ordinary small favors. How exactly was he supposed to repay this life-saving favor? Blue bears like peach juice. Yi Zichen wondered if the three-legged golden crow would be interested in such delicacies. What he was more concerned about was its true form. The three-legged golden crow. In the legends of the modern realm, Ho-E once shot down 9 suns, leaving only one, the current sun. The modern realm, which revered science, already knew that the sun was a fixed star. The three-legged golden crow was just a myth. However, Yi Zichen had come into contact with a former deity, seen the great sage wreak havoc in the heavenly court, befriended the heavenly court's war god Yang Jian, and interacted with the Queen Mother and the Jade Emperor. He'd also learned that the love story between the Supreme Treasure and Fairy Zixiao really did exist. This time, the three-legged golden crow had transformed into a sun. Was it possible that the sun the world believed to be a fixed star really was a three-legged golden crow? Yi Zichen smiled and shook his head. He didn't dwell on the matter any longer. He had encountered too many strange things. Even if the sun was really a three-legged golden crow, it was nothing for him to make a fuss about. Moreover, he still had to seek revenge from Gu Xuanda. Even if Gu Xuanda had not thrown him into the dimensional rift, he would not have met Pilar. He couldn't bring this guy out of the time corridor either. But that was a completely different matter. He had been thrown into the dimensional spatial crack, almost causing him to die in the spatial storm. No matter what, he would not let this grudge go. Even if he couldn't defeat him, he still had to demand an explanation from him. How does it feel to be in the god race's territory? Yi Zichen glanced to the side. In the end, the great demon king left the subdimension with Yi Zichen. At that moment, Pilar was just a few meters away from Yi Zichen. He looked around at the pure white snow, his eyes flashing with surprise, as if he'd never seen snow before. God race. Pilar was taken aback for a moment, but he quickly understood. You humans really think too highly of yourselves. You're just an ordinary, low-level race, yet you call yourself a god race. I don't care what you say. In any case, everyone here calls this place the god race. Yi Zichen ignored Pilar's slander and chuckled. Furthermore, Pilar's words weren't directed at him. He was merely stating a fact. There was no need for Yi Zichen to argue with him. Is this your territory? Asked Pilar. Of course not. Yi Zichen looked around, then extended his divine sense outwards. If his guess was right, this was the divine mountain under the Jade Lake Palace head's control. However, it was very close to the central divine mountain. It was just as the divine arbiter had said. From here, he could clearly see that the central divine mountain was surrounded by a blood-colored barrier. Divine sense couldn't reach inside, and the mountain was completely isolated from the outside world. Yi Zichen had no way of knowing what Zhou Zhouwu was doing inside. However, Yi Zichen sensed something unusual about the blood-colored barrier. There's something special about this barrier. Pilar spoke up as well. Clearly, she had also noticed the bloody orb of the central divine mountain. Of course, the God Emperor lives there. The God Emperor? Are you not? You're the Lord of the Emperor Star. If nothing out of the ordinary happens, you should be the leader of the human race. Why do you say that? Isn't it only natural? Pilar felt that Yi Zichen was absolutely right. Perhaps it was because he was the demon king that he had such thoughts. In his inherited memories, the Lord of the Emperor Star status was similar to his status as the demon king. He was an existence capable of leading the human race to prosperity. The Emperor Star should be the God Emperor of the God race. Unfortunately, this was a special time. The ambitious Zhou Wu wasn't the kind of wise ruler who could abdicate his throne. Who knew? Zhou Wu might even be researching how to steal Yi Zichen's starlight and celestial fate. Let's not talk about this anymore. Yi Zichen couldn't be bothered to argue. He waved his hand and dropped the subject. At this point in time, it was no longer important who would take the position of God Emperor. Besides, there was already a clear difference between the two of them. The righteous and the unrighteous. The righteous received much support, while the unrighteous received little. That was the case between Yi Zichen and Zhou Wu. Practically all of the God race's emperors were on good terms with Yi Zichen. As for Zhou Wu, he had practically no trusted aides he could use. In these special times, he wasn't thinking about how to defend against foreign enemies. Rather, he'd sealed up the Divine Mountains and was busy with who knew what. To tell the truth, Zhou Wu wasn't much of a threat to Yi Zichen. He wasn't much of a threat anymore. However, the Central Divine Mountain's current situation was strange. He still had to be on guard. Once he returned to the 10th Divine Mountain, he'd have to send some people to keep an eye on the Central Divine Mountain. Pilar could tell that Yi Zichen didn't want to discuss this any further, so he didn't say anything else. However, I didn't think you'd really leave the time corridor. It seems you're coming back with me? Pilar's concession allowed Yi Zichen to shift the topic back to him. However, he didn't resist too much. From the moment he left the time corridor, he'd already made up his mind. "What?" asked Pilar. "If that's the case, shouldn't we be more honest with each other?" Chapter 1732. Although Chaos City hadn't been built for long, and there weren't many experts who chose to live here, everyone who could afford to stay was an elite. This meant that there was a business opportunity here that everyone envied. An endless stream of merchant caravans passed through the city gates to be interrogated. These merchants all wanted to make a killing in this city. In truth, they've been thinking the same thing all along, and in the end, it turned out to be just as they'd expected. The merchants all made a killing, which prompted even more merchants to come here. For a moment, Chaos City felt like a business center. Xiao Yimei had always supported this idea. Chaos City also provided great privacy and preferential policies for foreign merchants and experts who came here to purchase goods. Both merchants and buyers enjoyed admiring this new city. However, the recent atmosphere in Chaos City had been stifling, making it hard for them to breathe. They didn't know what was going on, but they discovered that Chaos City's security had become much stricter than before. There were also several times more checks and patrols within the city. Every single Chaos City guard had an indescribably grave look in their eyes. This made everyone in the city feel like something big had happened in Chaos City. It had. Why haven't there been any results yet? Xiao Yin stood in front of the hall and paced back and forth. There were several guest elders in the room. In terms of rank, Xiao Yin was actually on the same level as them. However, he'd once been the Lightning Emperor, so his aura was a bit stronger. As he furrowed his brows, practically no one in the room dared to meet his gaze. They all stood on either side of the room, their hands clasped behind their backs. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Suddenly, the sound of something slicing through the air could be heard. When Xiao Yin heard it, he looked outside and saw Xiao Hu hurrying in with a few Emperor-level generals in tow. Third Elder. Xiao Hu bowed deeply towards Xiao Yin. The Emperor-level generals behind him cupped their hands in greeting as well. Xiao Yin quickly walked up to them. Before he could say anything, Xiao Hu looked up, his expression dark. "We went to the ancients, but they wouldn't let us in at all. They said that without their summons, we can't enter and leave as we please." "Didn't you tell them that you were a lion's head, yes, subordinates, and that you had something to report to him?" asked Xiao Yin with a frown. "We told you, Third Elder," one of the generals said with a bitter expression, but they said they didn't know Alliance Master Yi at all. Deacon Xiao, who got into an argument with him, and the Gu clan directly sent an imperial monarch to chase us out. Moreover, Deacon Xiao, who was even injured because of this. After that, he even threatened. "The ancients don't have someone like a lion's head, Yi. If we dare cause trouble in their territory again, they'll show us no mercy." Only then did Xiao Yin notice that Xiao Hu's right arm hung limply by his side. There was even a trace of dried blood at the corner of his shirt. Preposterous. What was the ancient race trying to do? Xiao Yin slammed the table beside him, turning it to dust. The other guest chamberlains and elders in the room couldn't help but shrink their necks and lower their heads even more. They were the ones who found Alliance Master Yi, and now they're saying that they don't even know who Alliance Master Yi is, and they even attacked our people. Just because they were aboriginals, they could do whatever they wanted. Do they really think the Upheaval Alliance is easy to bully? A thunderous roar exploded through the room. Lightning crackled around Xiao Yan's body, casting the room in a deathly white. "Third Elder, please calm down. We're talking about the ancient race. You know what they're capable of. If the ancient race heard what you're saying, the Upheaval Alliance really might not be able to hold out against them. So what if they heard?" Xiao Yin glared viciously at the guest chamberlain who'd just spoken, his bloodshot eyes radiating an intimidating, ominous light. The guest chamberlains were so frightened by his gaze that they hurriedly lowered their heads. Xiao Yan's eyes were also bloodshot. Just because the ancient race is powerful, they can detain the Alliance head and prevent him from returning. Just because the ancient race is powerful, they can be unreasonable. Everyone in the room cowered in fear, not daring to respond. Enraged, Xiao Yin paced back and forth in the room for a long time. The others lowered their heads, and waited. A while passed. Xiao Hu, you've worked hard. Go back and get some rest. Xiao Hu walked up to Xiao Hu, patted him on the shoulder, and took a deep breath. Only then did he look up. He glanced at the ribbon on the table, as well as the letter written entirely with divine power. Don't worry about my injuries. Right now, what's important is how we deal with the current situation. Xiao Yan looked deeply at the ribbon. And the letter had been delivered to the Upheaval Alliance 3 days ago. It was this letter that had instantly made Xiao Yan so restless and agitated. What else can we do? Keep asking the ancient race for him. Alliance head, Yi has to return. No matter what the ancient race says, he has to come back and take charge. Xiao Hu, no, you're injured. You'd best stay in the Alliance and recuperate. How about this, Fifth Elder? Yes, sir. The Fifth Elder of the Upheaval Alliance was none other than Wei Jie, the man who'd once helped Yi Zichen manage the Upheaval Alliance. He wasn't particularly talented, and even with the Alliance's constant supply of pills, he was still only a ruler. Given the Upheaval Alliance's current situation, he wasn't qualified to be an elder at all. However, he had Yi Zichen's deep trust, which was why he'd managed to secure a seat among the elders. Although your cultivation isn't high, I'm afraid I can't compare to you when it comes to dealing with people. Although the ancient race has detained our Alliance head, he's still an ancient. Even if the Upheaval Alliance goes all out, we might not be their match. You're eloquent and eloquent, so you'll lead the team this time. I'll find you 3 emperors and 10 emperors. Once they head to the ancient race, they'll definitely bring Alliance head Yi back. All right, unless I die in the ancient race's hands, Alliance head Yi will definitely return to the Upheaval Alliance. Wei Jie solemnly vowed, his high-spirited words echoing in the room for a long time. Everyone knew that the Upheaval Alliance needed Yi Zichen to return and take charge. Xiao Yan didn't dare guarantee that he'd be able to prioritize the bigger picture. What's going on here? Why does our Elder Wei sound so hot-blooded? At that moment, a low, joking voice came from outside the room. Everyone looked toward the door and saw 2 figures standing in front of it. A beam of light shone on them through the gaps in the clouds, causing their clothes to be dyed with a layer of golden light. They really did look like saviors. Xiao Yan, who'd been fuming all this time, suddenly let out a sigh of relief. Chapter 1733. Seeing the letter was like seeing your face. I've long since heard of the Third Era's Alliance head Yuanya's fame. Although we've never met, we've known each other for a long time. A few days ago, one of the Alliance head's generals appeared outside our borders. I saw that he was injured, so I invited the generals to come and treat your injuries. Little did I know, my goodwill was misinterpreted by the Alliance head subordinates. Countless experts have arrived at our borders, and I'm terrified. Fortunately, the Alliance head subordinates understand the bigger picture and understood what was going on. I've always been hospitable, and I know they're close friends of the Alliance head. Furthermore, one of them is the Alliance head's lover, so I invited them to stay as guests. The Naiwu clan's land is barren, and our food supply is barely enough to make a living. I can't neglect my esteemed guests, but my clansmen have suffered. I can't rest easy. Fortunately, the Alliance head's lover understands the bigger picture and empathizes with our people. However, the Alliance head has to personally escort them back before they're willing to return. I know how much work the Alliance head has to do, and I can't bear to tire you out. However, this matter concerns the lifeblood of our clansmen, so I have no choice but to ask you to come to our lands and escort them back. In order to prove my words are true, I've brought the Alliance head's red scarf with me. I hope, Alliance head, you can empathize with our hardships. I really want to be friends with you. I swear to the heavens that I bear you no ill will. I hope you'll do me the honor of visiting us. As soon as Yi Zichen opened the envelope, golden words appeared before his eyes. If he didn't think too much about it, he'd just read the letter. It was an invitation letter. It was also a request letter filled with a strong sense of pleading. The corners of Yi Zichen's lips curled into a smile. Then he put the letter away. The golden words slowly faded from sight. Everyone in the room had seen this letter before. Everyone who'd read it stood with their hands by their sides. Xiao Yan, who'd been waiting for Yi Zichen to speak, clenched his fists tightly. From time to time, his knuckles cracked. Yi Zichen placed the letter back on the table. Everyone in the room looked at him as he picked up the ribbon on the table. Yi Zichen remembered the ribbon very clearly. It was a gift he had given to Xiao Yumei on her birthday. Xiao Yumei had always treated this ribbon as a treasure and always carried it with her. The fact that the ribbon had appeared here proved that Xiao Yumei was in the hands of the messenger. As for her situation, Yi Zichen had no way of knowing. Yi Zichen put the scarf away, then sat down. Xiaoyan didn't see the seriousness or impatience in his eyes. Instead, there was a faint hint of a smile. Xiaohu, what happened to your arm? Yi Zichen, who was sitting on the chair, saw Xiaohu's limp arm. Reporting to Alliance Master, this subordinate is fine. This must be done by the ancient race. Yi Zichen had heard some of Xiaohu's conversation before entering the room, so he had a rough idea of where Xiaohu's injuries came from. Guxuan was really something. Not only did he throw him into the spatial fault, but he also dealt such a heavy blow to his subordinates. The ancient race is really going overboard. Seems like I've got to have a good chat with them when I'm free. Otherwise, they would really think that the world is theirs. Alliance Master, this has nothing to do with you. Yi Zichen interrupted Xiaohu, then looked ahead with a profound gaze. Alliance Master, let's keep talking. This letter is pretty interesting. Interesting? Xiaoyan narrowed his eyes. What? Is it boring? Didn't you see what it says? Yumei and the others went to the Master's clan as guests. The Master is simply too hospitable, to the point that his clansmen are about to starve to death. Now, he's begging us to hurry up and bring Yumei and the others back. Yi Zichen laughed, then continued. Yumei and the others are the same. They just like to play around and make friends. But her eyesight is too poor. Doesn't she know that she's starved to poverty? She's throwing a tantrum and asking me to bring her back. Forget it. Perhaps I really haven't spent enough time with her lately. I need to find some time to spend more time with her. Yi Zichen muttered to himself, but little did he know that everyone else in the room buried their heads deeper and deeper. They could all sense the hidden fury in Yi Zichen's words. It was like a volcano about to erupt. Nothing special about it, but they couldn't help but feel their hearts race. However, Xiaoyan couldn't tell. Or rather, given the current situation, he wasn't in the mood to listen. Xiao Yumei was his big sister. Ever since he'd left the Lightning Emperor's estate. Or perhaps since Xiao Ting betrayed the God race and joined the demons, his only family had been Xiao Yumei and Xiao Hu. Now that Xiao Yumei was in trouble, no one could understand how anxious he was. If not for Xiao Yumei's warning to Xiao Yin to prioritize the bigger picture, he would have led the Upheaval Alliance and slaughtered them long ago. He'd thought Yi Zichen would understand his feelings, but now it seemed. I really misjudged you. As soon as Xiao Yin said that, everyone else in the room looked in his direction, wide-eyed. Xiao Hu repeatedly shot him a meaningful glance, indicating that he shouldn't speak carelessly. However, Xiao Yin ignored his warning. Yi Zichen narrowed his eyes and laughed. Let him speak. Xiao Hu didn't dare try anything funny. Yi Zichen looked at Xiao Yin. Continue. Xiao Yin snorted angrily. Don't look at me like that to scare me. I'm the Lightning Emperor, and my position isn't any lower than your Upheaval Alliances. If you want to pressure me with your power, there's no need for that. You're overthinking things. I'm just telling you to continue. I really want to know what kind of person you think I am. Laughed Yi Zichen. At this moment, the atmosphere in the room had already frozen. The sun had set at some point, and a layer of mist had enveloped the city. The orange-red light hit the fog, turning the entire world dark red. Yi Zichen narrowed his eyes and smiled. He gestured with his eyes for Xiao Yin to continue speaking. Xiao Yin didn't hesitate at all and snorted, Fine. That ribbon belongs to my sister. There's no way you wouldn't recognize it. You gave it to my sister, and she carries it around like a treasure. It's clear how infatuated she is with you. But you have countless beauties by your side, and you're not loyal. But my sister told me that as long as you held her in your heart, it was fine. She even told me not to overthink things. I agreed, thinking that as long as you treated her well, I'd be happy. But what did you do? Xiao Yan, stop, growled Xiao Hu. Why shouldn't I? Xiao Yan turned and glared at Xiao Hu. He pushed all the alliance's affairs onto my sister while he enjoyed his freedom. The contents of that letter were clear. The Vice Alliance heads and the others had been detained, and their fates were unknown. You and I were both worried about my sister, but my sister? What the hell is this man doing? Chapter 1734. Sometimes anger was like this. When a person was truly enraged, he would ignore everything in front of him. It didn't matter if they were facing an undefeatable opponent or someone of high status. In this situation, they didn't care about any of that. He simply wanted to vent the anger in his heart. Xiao Yan was a prime example. Xiao Yumei was extremely important to him, so important that she was more important than his own life. Her uncertain fate had caused Xiao Yan to lose all sense of reason. Then there was Yi Zichen's inaction. His cold demeanor was like a catalyst, fuel for his rage. If he said no, it didn't matter if he could or couldn't say it, if he should or shouldn't say it. Even if it was some trivial matter, it would not matter at all. Even if it was a trivial matter, everything would appear in Xiao Yan's mind, and Yi Zichen's flaws would be magnified without limit. Xiao Hu retreated. Was he supposed to tell Xiao Yan that Yi Zichen wasn't actually like he thought? Would Xiao Yan listen? Was that even possible? He knew that even if he tried to persuade Xiao Yan wouldn't listen. On the contrary, it would only serve as a catalyst for his rage. The only difference between humans and wild beasts was their intelligence. When humans lost their rationality, they were no different from wild beasts. In fact, their bodies were far inferior. Rather than trying to persuade Xiao Yan, it was better to tell Yi Zichen not to bicker with him. Alliance head. The others didn't dare speak up for Xiao Yan for fear of getting dragged into this mess. Xiao Hu was different. He was related to Xiao Yan. Even looking at Xiao Yan was disrespectful. The others didn't dare speak up for him, but Xiao Hu had to. Even if he did, he might get dragged into this mess. However, Yi Zichen didn't give Xiao Hu a chance to speak. As soon as he spoke, several Emperor-level experts appeared outside the room. Most of these experts were from the First Era, and they obeyed Yi Zichen. As for the others, they wouldn't listen, not even to Xiao Yumei. Strangely enough, they were fugitives from the First Era. By the time they arrived in the Third Era, most of them were rulers, but not long after, their cultivation had risen by leaps and bounds. 30% of the previous rulers had become emperors. Only the higher-ups of the Upheaval Alliance knew about this. Not even the other great emperors of the Divine Mountains knew. If they knew, Yi Zichen had hundreds of thousands of emperors on the 10th Divine Mountain, and that number was still rising. What would he think? One had to know that the other Divine Mountains, although there was hidden energy, it was only a small part of it. These emperors were the reason Yi Zichen didn't even spare the ancients a glance. The ancient race's strength lay in the number of the arch-experts they had. Of course, it was also because of the existence of a half-step transcendent. However, if the two clans were to fight, the energy of a half-step transcendent could destroy the world with a wave of their hands. The Master of the Laws couldn't possibly allow them to do as they pleased. Otherwise, the ancients wouldn't have been able to live in a subdimension. The other races believed that the ancient race was transcendent. Little did they know that this kind of transcendence was just a method of the ancient race. As soon as the great emperor entered the room, his aura locked onto Xiao Yan. As Xiao Yumei's younger brother, Xiao Yan had once been the emperor of lightning punishment. He could be considered a core member of the upper echelon, so he knew who these people were. He could resist. With his strength as an imperial lord, it was easy for him to escape from the hands of these imperial lords. But he knew, even if he managed to break out of the room, there would be more emperors and emperors waiting for him outside. Detain Xiao Yan. With a single command, the emperors seized Xiao Yan. Xiao Yan didn't resist, but his bloodshot eyes continued to glare at Yi Zichen. His eyes burned with fury and hatred. He wanted nothing more than to skin Yi Zichen alive. Yi Zichen, even if you don't like me, my sister is infatuated with you. You can't let her down like this. If anything happens to my sister, even if I become a vengeful spirit, I won't let you off. Take him away. The Imperial Lord grabbed Xiao Yan by the shoulder and led him out of the room. Even though they'd been gone for some time, Xiao Yan's furious roars still echoed through the room. The others fell silent. Xiao Hu gnashed his teeth as he watched Xiao Yan being dragged away. Even the stewards he was on good terms with gestured for him not to say anything. But he couldn't just sit back and watch. Just now, Xiao Yan knew that if he said those things, Yi Zichen wouldn't let him off easily, but he'd done it anyway. This was human nature. Humans have feelings, especially familial love. Alliance head, Xiao Yan. I don't blame him. Yi Zichen rubbed his aching temples, his expression weary. I know he did it for Yumei's sake. He's Yumei's little brother, so it's normal for him to say such things. I don't blame him, and in fact, I'm happy for Yumei for having a little brother like that. But this isn't our home. This is the Upheaval Alliance. Since this was a matter of the Imperial Court, he couldn't allow his personal feelings to get mixed up. At a time like this, all captives are equal. Yumei is no different. I only sent Xiao Yan away to calm him down. If he causes trouble like this, he won't be able to handle the situation. When he heard this, Xiao Hu calmed down. Little did he know, Pilar's brows twitched slightly. He'd come with Yi Zichen and witnessed everything. When Xiao Yan was taken away, based on his demonic gaze, he knew this guy was beyond saving. He never would have guessed Yi Zichen would say something like that. Despite Xiao Yan's words, he fiercely maintained a clear head. Bonus points. If they worked together, it would be hard to avoid a rift between him and Yi Zichen in the future. If Yi Zichen was a rational person, he wouldn't act on impulse. He needed allies like that. Xiao Hu retreated, knowing that Xiao Yan would be fine. He relaxed somewhat, but Yumei and the other situation couldn't be delayed. Alliance head, how do you plan to save the Vice Alliance head and the others? We can't go rashly, said Wei Jia. This is clearly a Hongmin banquet. If you go, you'll be surrounded by danger. Furthermore, we might have missed something important. What is it? Asked Xiao Hu. The messenger didn't give us an address at all. Even if we know it's the outside is too vast. How are we supposed to find them? Xiao Hu and the others suddenly froze. They thought back to the letter they'd received. There really wasn't an address, not even a direction. Xiao Yan, who was worried about Yumei, hadn't noticed. Xiao Hu hadn't noticed, and neither had the others. What are they trying to do? Roared Xiao Hu. They'd invited Yi Zichen as a guest, but hadn't given him an address? Were they toying with them? Huh. Chapter 1735. As Yi Zichen shifted his gaze, the others looked in his direction as well, especially after what he'd just said. Partners. The alien-like guy in front of me is actually Yi Zichen's partner? Everyone couldn't help but look at Pilar in a higher light. By now, the Upheaval Alliance had long since become an existence that neither the God Realm nor the Three Realms could ignore. It had an enormous alliance system, and it had internal factions. Countless gods, and Yao wanted to join the Upheaval Alliance and rest on this giant tree. However, the Upheaval Alliance had always been strict with its choices of allies. They'd relied on the Nine-Tailed Fox Clan, Xia Kiki, Zhuge Kongming, and Wei Chun to get the dragons, vermilion birds, and white tigers to join. Not long ago, these clan heads had joined the Upheaval Alliance. As for the black tortoises, the dragon clan head had tried to plead on their behalf, but Yi Zichen felt there was something strange about them. Even though they were one of the 4 sacred beast clans, the black tortoises hadn't joined the Upheaval Alliance. From this, it was clear that Yi Zichen was very strict with his choices of allies. It wasn't that the strength of their clans affected whether or not they joined the Upheaval Alliance. More importantly, Yi Zichen trusted them. Pilar. From the moment he entered the room, the others had already noticed his presence. Or rather, given his appearance, it was hard to ignore him. Not even Xiao Hu, who'd lived for nearly 10,000 years, had ever seen someone so ugly. It was hard not to take a few glances at him. However, everyone's focus had been on Xiao Yumei and the others, so they hadn't paid much attention to Pilar. Now, Yi Zichen changed the subject to Pilar. More importantly, based on Yi Zichen's words, this alien fellow knew where the God Realm was. Suddenly, Pilar became the focus of everyone's gazes. An ordinary person would have long since collapsed under the pressure of so many emperors staring at them. Pilar just smiled lightly completely ignoring the gazes of these people. For better or worse, he'd once been a demon king, or rather, he still was. He just didn't have the terrifying power of a demon, nor did he have any loyal subjects. "Do I need to prove my worth?" asked Pilar. "Of course not," said Yizichin. "Your existence is the embodiment of your value, but only you can resolve the current situation. We don't have much contact with the Outer Realm God race. They didn't leave their address, so it's very difficult for us to find their location. So you're asking for my help. You could say that, but I prefer to think of it as helping a friend. Friends should help each other. I like this saying." Pilar grinned, but he did not know how ugly his smile was. When the female managers in the room saw his smile, they almost vomited the food they had eaten a few years ago. Yizichin tilted his head, then turned to the others in the room. "You don't have to deal with Vice Alliance Master Zhao's matters. Go back and deal with your other matters. Xiaohu, you stay." Everyone else in the room had left. After the last person had left the room, Xiaohu used his divine sense to check that there was no one else around. "Alliance Master, you're keeping me here because..." Before he could finish his sentence, Xiaohu saw a pill being thrown at him. The pill was pink in color, and there was even a hint of fragrance on its surface. It wasn't like other pills, which had a strong medicinal aroma. It was faint, and if you didn't smell it carefully, you wouldn't even notice it. "Alliance Master, this isn't for you to treat your injuries. You could say it's for you to heal." Xiaohu didn't quite understand what Yizichin was trying to say. "What do you mean? This is a pill our Hall of Pills developed." The Hall of Pills. This was the Upheaval Alliance's newly established Hall of Pills. Old Lord Taishang was the head of the hall, and there were hundreds of divine-grade pill refiners, tens of thousands of Grandmaster pill refiners, and countless Master pill refiners. The Hall of Pills existed to supply the Upheaval Alliance with pills. Practically 90% of the Upheaval Alliance's pill refiners came from the Hall of Pills. The Alliance Head and Vice Alliance Head were in charge of the Hall of Pills. Given Xiaohu's level, he had no way of knowing what was going on. However, he knew that while the Hall of Pills was refining, they were also working on a new type of pill. This was what he'd heard from Xiaoyan. "I won't lie to you about this pill, but it's not a finished product." Yizichin glanced at the pill in Xiaohu's hands. "I said it's not a finished product because no one has tested its effects before. Any medicinal pill had to go through thousands of experiments and deliberations before it could be withdrawn. No one knew the effects of a pill that hadn't been tested before. It wasn't impossible for someone to die after eating it. I'm giving this pill to you because I think you're suitable," said Yizichin. "Don't blame me for using you to test the pill, but you have the final say. You can't force me to do it, but I have something to tell you. Alliance Head, please go ahead." Xiaohu didn't think Yizichin would harm him, but taking an untested pill like this was a recipe for disaster. Who knew what the final outcome would be? Fate was a thing that could be easily misunderstood. He trusted Yizichin, but he had to be careful about his own life. Old Lord Taishang personally refined this pill. As for who he is, you should know. He's the pill god who's risen to fame in recent years. "It's him?" Xiaohu froze. He'd heard of the pill god before. He descended from the lower realms, and in less than 2 years, he'd become the #1 divine-grade pill refiner. His pill refining skills were unparalleled, and quite a few famous divine-grade pill refiners wanted to take him as their master, but he refused. Quite a few factions had extended an olive branch to him, offering generous conditions that even emperors would go green with envy. But this pill god, he still refused. Xiaohu knew that a pill refiner had arrived in the Upheaval Alliance not long ago, but he never would have guessed it was the pill god. If the pill god had refined this pill, Xiaohu had much more confidence in it. "It seems you know." Yizichin noticed Xiaohu's change in expression and continued. "I provided the recipe for this pill. Many great emperors of the Divine Mountains and the Fox Empress know about it, and they're all amazed by it. This is the first pill I've refined, and it's also the one with the most ingredients." "This? I know. You've been stuck in the ruler realm for a long time, right?" "That's right," said Xiaohu. "If you're lucky, this pill might help you directly ascend to the emperor level, but it might also help you become immortal. This is an opportunity, but it's also an abyss." Chapter 1736. The Outside. The chaotic void was pitch black as far as the eye could see. Far off in the distance, they could just barely make out a single white dot. Pilar said it was the sun, but due to the chaotic space's special properties, light couldn't reach their location. Go Yuzhan and Yin Shang walked beside them. They'd come here on Yi Zichen's orders. Even with Pilar here, the outside god race was still full of unknowns. Furthermore, Pilar had made it very clear. The outside god race was strong, so strong that even a demon king like him couldn't help but pale at the mention of their name. No one knew, for sure, whether or not the contents of the letter were a trap. No matter who it was, no one could be sure what would happen once they arrived there, so the only thing they could do was to prepare for the worst in advance. As for Su Yiyun, the Sea Emperor's clone told them that Su Yiyun had left in a hurry 3 days ago. If nothing unexpected happened, they'd most likely meet again in the god race. How does it feel to reunite with the god race so soon? As they strolled through the outer realms, Yi Zichen smiled at Pilar, who was leading the way. Pilar told him everything. Pilar had lost all of his demonic power, gone into hiding in the time corridor, and his entire clan had been annihilated. Of course, he couldn't rule out the possibility that some of his fellow demons might have survived. However, given his current situation, it would be difficult to meet them again. All of this was because of the outside god race. Or rather, it was because of one person. Yi Zichen etched that person's name deeply into his heart. The god king of destruction, Yale. Was he in a good mood? Pilar stopped in his tracks, and an unnatural expression flashed across his face. The demon race had 13 demon kings in total. The previous 12 had protected the demon race, but Pilar was the only exception. When the outside god race attacked the demon race, his incompetence had led to the demon race's destruction. Needless to say, Pilar's resentment towards Yale went without saying. However, compared to that, he resented his own incompetence even more. With a stiff smile, Pilar diverted the topic. I should be asking you that. Our fiend race and the god race have known each other for billions of years. It's not the time for the foreign god race to invade the third era yet. What's your mood for meeting the foreign god race so early? Mixed feelings, said Yi Zichen. Pilar's lips curled into a smile. Yi Zichen's answer clearly intrigued her. Why do you say that? The Outer Realm god race has always been unknown to us. It can be said that we only know of their existence, but we don't know what they are. Their existence only exists in our fantasies. Pilar quietly listened to Yi Zichen, but didn't interrupt. Yi Zichen continued. Being able to see them in advance will at least allow me to have an intuitive understanding of them. Regardless of whether they are strong or weak, it will give me a sense of certainty in my heart, and I won't have to live in fear of the unknown. You know, the unknown is always the scariest. If we don't know what it is, the fear in our hearts will continue to grow. I understand. Pilar smiled and nodded. It wasn't just humans. When any race encountered an unknown situation, they'd take the problem more and more seriously. It was like covering someone's eyes and asking them to pet an adorable white rabbit. The blindfolded person wouldn't know what was in front of them. They become fearful and start imagining all sorts of terrifying things, which only serve to increase their fear. In truth, at the end of the day, this was a lack of confidence in oneself. If one's heart was strong enough to disregard everything else, then even if there was a lion in front of them, they'd still pet it without the slightest scruple. I hope you won't show any signs of fear when you see the god race. I definitely won't, said Yi Zichen. The worry on his face suddenly vanished, and Yi Zichen laughed. I'm a person who cares a lot about face. When I was young, even if someone older than me tried to hit me and my legs went numb, I'd still glare at them. I care about face. Not bad at all. Pilar smiled and nodded. Yi Zichen was telling the truth, but there was a hint of a joke in his words. He wanted to use this method to calm his heart. I didn't want to be so scared that I couldn't move my legs before entering the Outerium god race. Yi Zichen glanced at Go Yuzhan and Yin Shang. Their mental fortitude seemed a bit better than Yi Zichen's. Before coming, Yi Zichen had already explained everything that might happen to them in the future. Yet even now, the two of them looked completely relaxed. Go Yuzhan, in particular, looked left and right, as if he couldn't stay still. When he saw their expressions, Yi Zichen looked away, looked at Pilar, and asked the question he'd been wanting to ask for a long time. Pilar, did you just say that it's not time to attack the Third Era yet? It seems like you know some inside information. The Third Era was coming to an end. That was common knowledge. However, no one knew when or how it would end. Not even the three emperors knew. From what Pilar had just said, it was obvious he knew when the God race would attack the Third Era. You want to know? Pilar laughed. How could I possibly not want to know? In truth, the outsiders can't just attack on a whim. We need the Third Era to send them a signal. Whether it's the demon race or the God race, we're both first-level races. We can't proactively declare war on lower-level races, but you can. When you send us a signal, we can attack you. Of course, you can do the same. If we destroy you, everything will naturally be over. But if you destroy us, you'll be able to take away our race's rank and become a new first-level race. Take away. Yi Zichen's eyes widened. He never would have guessed that the clash between the God race and the First Era would be a competition between races. The God race was the protector, while the First Era was the challenger. However, this signal was definitely not an ordinary declaration of war. Yi Zichen refused to believe that anyone would be so bored as to initiate a war with the God race. The only possibility was... Pilar chuckled, but before he or Yi Zichen could say anything, three men with burning godheads appeared in the primal chaos around them. Chapter 1737. Their eyes met. The three of them had appeared out of nowhere. Although they were leading the way for Pilar, Yi Zichen and the others maintained absolute vigilance. Along the way, Yi Zichen and the others maintained absolute vigilance. Their divine senses never stopped scanning their surroundings. Even Go Yuzhan, who'd been acting casually, did the same. Their divine senses almost condensed into a dense net. Although the space in the primal chaos void was special, and their divine senses couldn't reach as far as they could in the demon realm, they could still scan everything within 1,000 meters. Their divine senses had shrunk, so they had to focus more on the completeness of their coverage. Their divine senses intersected with one another. Even a speck of dust that passed through their divine senses would be noticed. Right now, the three extraterritorial Protoss experts that had appeared were less than 100 meters away from them. This was the center of their divine senses. It was easy to imagine how dense it was. Even so, Yi Zichen and the others only noticed them when they took the initiative to reveal themselves. Experts. Go Yuzhan put away his playful thoughts. A black wooden staff appeared in his hand. Shang nodded, and the two of them intentionally moved closer to Yi Zichen and Pilar. Boss, these people won't be easy to deal with, transmitted Go Yuzhan. It was only natural that they wouldn't be easy to deal with. As soon as they arrived, they'd already revealed their identities. They were here on behalf of Yale. This was Yi Zichen's first meeting with the Outworld God race. They wouldn't send their strongest experts, but they wouldn't send mediocre people either. If nothing out of the ordinary happened, these people were probably in the upper echelons of the Outworld God race. They can completely ignore our divine sense net. We have to be careful, said Shang. They can't be underestimated, but there's no need to worry too much, said Yi Zichen. Yi Zichen's divine awareness reached Go Yuzhan and Shang's seas of consciousness, then turned to Pilar. Actually, what I'm more curious about is how they knew you were with me. Do you have his imprint on you? Absolutely not. I'm sure of it, swore Pilar. Then the Outworld God race has some tricks up their sleeves. Yi Zichen's gaze darkened, and he stared intently ahead. Pilar remained in the time corridor this entire time. Less than 4 hours after Yi Zichen returned to the God realm, they returned to the outside and headed for the God realm. In such a short time, Yale actually knew that they were traveling together. Then there were only two possibilities. They'd entered the range of Yale's divine sense. Perhaps he had eyes in the Upheaval Alliance. Either of those two possibilities was not a good thing for Yi Zichen. The former, Yi Zichen and the others' divine senses could only extend up to 1,000 meters, but Yale's could cover such a vast expanse of the primal chaos. It was clear that their spiritual power far surpassed Yi Zichen's. The latter, They had planted a spy, but they couldn't determine who it was. The enemy was in the dark, but they were out in the open. Every move the Upheaval Alliance made would be known to the outsiders, so they could defend themselves. But when the extraterritorial god race attacked the Third Era, they could catch them off guard. From this point of view, the Third Era was already at a disadvantage. Aristar Master, Devil King, our Master Yale has been waiting for a long time. Please follow us to the Destruction Shrine. The three emissaries spoke up once more. Yizichin looked at them. Their auras surged violently. Perhaps Yale had instructed them to, or perhaps they didn't want to lose face for the outsiders. From a moment they'd met, their godheads had been burning, especially the emissary in the middle. His godhead was burning a fiery red, and his skin was a bit red. Speaking of which, it was necessary to mention the outsiders' appearances. Unlike Pilar of the demon race, not only were they not ugly, but they were also somewhat handsome. Their physiques were similar to humans, but they looked more like Westerners. Yizichin engraved their faces in his mind, then smiled. Don't worry. I never would have guessed Yale would send someone to welcome us. I'm truly flattered. Aristar Master, you're too serious. The man with godhead flames on his forehead laughed. You're the Aristar Master, so you deserve this kind of treatment. Moreover, the Devil King is also here. Our Lord Yale had already asked us to wait here 6 hours ago. I still don't know your name. Qinghai, said the man with godhead flames. His surname was Qing. Yizichin nodded inwardly. He'd run into quite a few people with the surname Qing recently. Inside the Yao Ceiling Pagoda, Qinglan. The ancient race is Qingli. This time, the outsiders Qinghai had arrived. You really are surnamed Qing. Pilar suddenly transmitted. What? What's so special about being surnamed Qing? Asked Yizichin. There are 3 major clans in the north. Qing in the south, Qing in the north, and Shur in the middle. Qing is the most powerful of the 3. 40% of the gods in the north have the surname Qing. Their godheads are generally fire type, and they're born as lesser gods, said Pilar. The gods of clans too. Yizichin was speechless. He'd assumed the outsiders were all experts with godheads, and their population should be relatively small. He hadn't expected them to have clans too. Pilar's words meant that the outsiders had far more people than Yizichin had imagined. How many are there? Many. Pilar glanced at him. Many, like a swarm of locusts. Of course, there aren't as many as you humans. It's hard for gods to have children, especially angels. It might take 100 years to give birth to a baby angel. Angels don't ask random questions. When the time comes, I'll tell you everything I need to. Even if you find out now, it won't be good for you. When he thought about how Qinghai and the others were waiting, he had no choice but to drop the subject. However, based on Pilar's words, Yizichin could sense that his understanding of the outsiders was still too shallow. There were far more things here than he'd imagined. Yizichin suppressed his thoughts, then smiled at Qinghai. I didn't realize you were the young master of the Qing family. With Pilar present, Qinghai wasn't at all surprised that Yizichin knew about the Qing family. Besides, when they attacked the outside realm fiends, the Qing family was the main force. There was no need to be overly courteous, so she just smiled and nodded. Epic Master, Your Excellency Demon King, can we go to the Divine Palace of Destruction now? Our Excellency Yale has been waiting for you for far too long. If we wait any longer, I'm afraid we'll be punished. Then we can't let young Master Qing suffer. Chapter 1738. Hazy, mysterious. The 3 god race experts of Qinghai led the way. Yizichin followed them into the depths of the god race. This was the first time he'd ever felt anything like this. It was like facing the sea. If you sniffed the air carefully, you could even smell a faint fishy odor. Hazy mist enveloped the area. Neither the naked eye nor divine sense could see more than 100 meters into the distance. One could only vaguely see a tall building hidden in the clouds. However, when they approached the building that they had seen earlier disappeared into thin air. Coupled with the surrounding clouds and mist, it gave this place a mysterious feeling. Pilar, Go Yuzhan transmitted through his divine sense. Before entering the group, Yi Zichen had introduced himself and said that Pilar was leading the way. If they had any questions, they could ask him. As they walked, Go Yuzhan took in the sights as if he were sightseeing. Now, it was finally time to ask questions. Pilar said nothing. He didn't look back. Instead, his expression was the same as ever as he followed behind Qinghai and the others. What is it? Are we in the God realm now? How is that possible? This is the breeding ground for the aura break beasts, said Pilar. Just now, you probably saw some buildings hidden in the mist. When we got close, they disappeared. Those are aura break beasts. Go Yuzhan's eyes widened in shock. The buildings he'd seen earlier were all several hundred meters tall. Although he'd seen recordings of aura break beasts before, he hadn't seen them as clearly as now. He thought back to those towering figures he'd just seen. Go Yuzhan gulped. Even the fearless Go Yuzhan was starting to panic. It wasn't for any other reason. It was just that everything he'd seen just now had been too shocking. If he'd seen those beasts, given their size, wouldn't they have been able to eat 100 of him in one bite? He inexplicably shuddered. Now that he thought about it, he shuddered. Don't worry, everyone. Although the aura break beasts can devour all living creatures and aren't exactly docile, with us 3 brothers here, they won't hurt you no matter what. Please relax and don't worry too much, said Qinghai with a friendly smile. It looked like a friendly reminder, but given their current circumstances, even an idiot could tell that he was subtly mocking them. Maybe he didn't need to come here to go to the God race. He did this just to show off his power to the people of this era, to let them know the power of the God race. Yi Zichen wasn't sure if this was Yale's idea. However, from Yi Zichen's point of view, this display of strength was perfect. He was worried that he did not have a deep understanding of the essence-breaking beasts. This time, he could use this opportunity to learn more about the essence-breaking beasts. Little did they know that Yale had never instructed them to do so. Qinghai wanted to show off the might of the God realm, so he'd done this on purpose. He hadn't expected to fall right into Yi Zichen's trap. If Qinghai knew about this, how would he feel? Would Yale punish him heavily when he found out? Then I'll have to trouble young Master Qing. Back in the outside, Yi Zichen had said the same thing. As soon as he finished speaking, he devoted himself to collecting information about the yuan-breaking beast. As for dealing with Qinghai and the others, he left it to Inshang to handle. Time had passed. The God race was too hazy, so it was difficult for them to calculate time using sunlight. After entering the Protoss territory, his cell phone seemed to be disrupted by a magnetic field, and he could not keep time normally. All Yi Zichen and company knew was that they walked for a long time before finally leaving the area where the aura-breaking beasts were raised. Of course, this trip hadn't been in vain. Yi Zichen really did gather quite a bit of information about the aura-breaking beasts. There were 4 types of yuan-breaking beasts, and the most common one was the raging bull body. The raging bull physique breaking chi beast was about 300 zhang tall when it was young, and it was 100 zhang tall when it was fully grown. Those above 1,000 feet were generally the leaders of the beasts, and the social status here was largely related to their size. Apart from the raging bull body, there were 3 more: ape body, amphibious body, and avian body. This meant that if the Protoss were to attack in the future, they would be able to launch an all-out attack on land, water, and air. Especially the bird body. Even though Yi Zichen hadn't actually touched it, he only scanned the edges with his divine sense. However, he could still see that the feathers on the bird's body were like sharp blades. Its sharpness and sturdiness were definitely not inferior to a divine artifact. In order to compete with them, they would have to establish an air force that was fully equipped with high-quality god artifact armor, and their cultivation level would be around that of a divine general. How lucky! If Qinghai hadn't brought him here, he would never have guessed that there were so many different types of yuan-breaking beasts. There were actually species on land, water, and air. Planet Lord of the Epoch, our divine city is right in front of us. The people living in this city are all titled gods, so please be careful, Star-Lord era. If you anger one of the gods, Qinghai won't be able to protect you. Thank you. Within a majestic palace, there was a seat at the top of a flight of stairs over 100 meters high. From this seat, one could see everything below. However, the people below couldn't see the person's face clearly due to the mist. A young man reclined on the seat. 6 maids stood behind him, either massaging his shoulders, legs, fanning him, or serving him snacks. He sat there, enjoying himself, and looked down at the people standing on either side of the palace. "So slow," muttered the young man. No one else in the palace dared make a sound. Only a woman to the young man's right looked up at him with a heroic air. "I have matters to take care of in the palace, so I don't have time to waste with you." The young man squinted his eyes. In the entire palace, or rather, in the entire northern god race, there was only one person who dared to speak to him like that. If anyone else spoke like that, the young man would have sent them to paradise long ago. But not this woman. He had to let her have her way. As for the reason, he liked this woman. "Don't worry, you're always like this. Just let it go in the palace. If it really is too difficult, I'll find someone from the divine palace to help you," said the young man dotingly. "There's no need for you to worry about that." The woman's expression and words were filled with endless disgust for the young man. The young man merely smiled. He was already used to all of this. No matter what, he was always on the winning side. It was only in front of this woman that he felt defeated. He really enjoyed this feeling and was confident that he could take down this thorny rose. The young man calmed himself down and smiled. All right, then I won't interfere with your matters. But wait a bit, a few friends will be here soon." Friends? Chapter 1739. The doors opened. Thick clouds slipped into the hall through the cracks in the palace. Dim fluorescent light also shone into the palace from the outside, casting the shadows of the people outside into the hall. The 12 people in the hall all looked towards the door, including the woman. Before long, footsteps sounded out unhurriedly. Qinghai was burning with the power of his godhead. The flames on his forehead were incomparably dazzling. He walked to the center of the hall and knelt on one knee. "Your Excellency Yale, your subordinate has come to report. You've done well. Bring them here and you may leave." Qinghai nodded solemnly, then walked out of the hall. After that, the doors opened a half-meter gap, and Yi Zichen and his party of 4 walked in. "We're finally going to meet." Yi Zichen walked through the hall with his chest puffed out and his back ramrod straight. He didn't even look around as he entered. As soon as he entered, he sensed 12 auras locking onto him. They didn't seem aggressive at all. Rather, they seemed to be trying to figure out who he was. However, what caught his attention was that among these auras, there seemed to be an aura that was particularly unstable. Yi Zichen subconsciously looked in the direction of the aura and saw a graceful woman with a charming face. Furthermore, judging from the way she stood, if Yi Zichen's guess was right, her position was obviously the highest among the 12 people in the hall. "Don't look around." Pilar, who was slowly following Yi Zichen, narrowed his eyes. His reaction was completely different from Yi Zichen's. "What is it?" asked Yi Zichen in confusion. Pilar's lips twitched. When he looked at the people in the hall, his gaze was filled with undisguisable hatred. After he entered the hall, there were at least 11 extremely aggressive auras that came in contact with him. He knew all of these people, and he would never forget them for the rest of his life. They're the 12 over-gods under the God King of Destruction Yale. When Yi Zichen heard that, he froze. Didn't that mean these people were the enemies of Pilar's clan? No wonder Yi Zichen sensed Pilar's unstable aura as soon as he entered. His entire body radiated an undisguisable, murderous aura. However, he was more concerned about that woman. Why did she reveal such emotional fluctuations when she saw him? There was surprise, fear, and worry. It was as if this woman had known Yi Zichen for a long time, and their relationship wasn't shallow at all. However, Yi Zichen couldn't find any memories of her at all. He glanced at the woman again, and their eyes met. The woman quickly lowered her head to avoid Yi Zichen's gaze. Little did they know that this scene was completely witnessed by Yale. This woman was the target of his pursuit, so he naturally paid more attention to her than anyone else. He clearly saw the change in the woman's expression when she saw Yi Zichen. However, he didn't say anything. Instead, he retracted his gaze and looked at Yi Zichen. The instant Yale's gaze landed on him, Yi Zichen sensed his gaze. Although the thick clouds prevented him from seeing Yale clearly, he still raised his head and stared back at him, refusing to back down. They stared at each other in silence, causing the atmosphere in the hall to plummet. As they stared at each other through the clouds, it was as if sparks were flying between them. The other god lords didn't move. In Shang, Go Yuzhan, and Pilar stood there silently, their hands clasped behind their backs. The clouds in the hall suddenly parted, leaving a 2-meter-wide path in the middle. Only then did Yi Zichen truly see Yale's face. He was a very handsome young man. From his face, it was easy to see how calm he was. When he laughed heartily, it was easy to win people's favor. He sat in his chair, his back straight. His eyes radiated a somewhat intimidating aura, and his deep, profound gaze was the complete opposite of his appearance, mature and weathered. This was the God King of Destruction, the most brutal and warlike of the outsiders. Ha! After a long while, Yale laughed heartily from his vantage point. Yale's laughter dissipated the pressure from before. He rose to his feet, took a few steps, and landed in front of Yi Zichen. As if they were old friends, he reached out and patted Yi Zichen on the shoulder. Star-Lord of the epic era, your presence brings light to my humble abode. Yale's voice was low, but very pleasing to the ear. It was as if he were bathing in a spring breeze, and the heavy pressure in the hall lessened considerably. It was obvious that Yale was a shrewd man. He wasn't some brainless, battle-hungry fellow. Although he was an enemy, you couldn't slap a smiling face, so Yi Zichen could only smile. I never would have guessed that the God King of Destruction from the outside would know our language. Your presence brings light to my humble abode. Using that phrase on me is truly frightening. I've always been deeply interested in the language of the Star-Lord's era, so I've been researching it. However, in front of you, it's a bit like displaying one slight skill in front of an expert. If Star-Lord Yi discovers a few things I've used incorrectly, please don't hesitate to enlighten me. No problem. Yale laughed once more, then glanced at Pilar. When enemies met, their eyes blazed with hatred. That was the perfect description for Pilar. Yale had single-handedly destroyed the demon race. To Pilar, Yale held a grudge against him that stemmed from the destruction of his entire race. An emperor couldn't endure the destruction of a country. Pilar was a glorious demon king, yet his entire race had been destroyed. No matter how shrewd he was, he couldn't restrain his anger. Your Excellency, Demon King, we meet again. Even though Pilar's gaze was as murderous as ever, Yale's lips curved into a smile. His expression was relaxed. Or perhaps it was more accurate to say that Pilar had nothing to worry about. The demon race had been destroyed, and Pilar, the Demon King, had lost all of his demonic power. In front of Yale, Pilar was nothing more than a dancing clown. Yi Zichen couldn't be bothered to feel even the slightest bit irritated by Yi Zichen's words. On the contrary, he enjoyed this feeling. In truth, Pilar didn't know. He'd only escaped into the time corridor at Yale's behest, all for the sake of this. Yale! Pilar squeezed the word out through clenched teeth. Yale shook his head and sighed. It seems Your Excellency, Demon King, is still brooding over the previous war. It's already been so long. Why can't Your Excellency, Demon King, set aside your hatred and live a peaceful life? Chapter 1740. Generally speaking, demons weren't particularly tall. Even though Pilar was a demon king, he couldn't escape the demon race's genetic problem. He was less than 1.5 meters tall, so when he stood in front of Yale, he only came up to his chest. Yale's chest was practically touching Pilar's nose. He looked down from above, his eyes filled with mockery and disdain. When he heard this, Yi Zichen's brows instantly furrowed. Go Yuzhan and In Shang were secretly trying to connect with the Nirvana stars and use their power. Yale's words were merciless. Anyone could sense that the tension was already at its peak, but haha! Just a second ago, Yale's expression had been one of unbridled arrogance, but now he burst into laughter. He reached out and patted Pilar on the shoulder, his gaze gentle. Did you think I'd say that? As he spoke, Yale glanced at Yi Zichen and smiled. You're right. The demons and gods have bordered each other for billions of years. Although there's constant friction between us, we're both superior races. At our level, You should know that our clansmen's lifespans have long since reached the point where they'll perish with the world. For our clansmen to multiply, we need more resources, as well as more land. For this, the demons and gods go to war every million years. I'm sure you know this, Pilar. It's all for the sake of effectively reducing the number of clansmen. Pilar said nothing, but he didn't refute. It seemed he silently agreed with Yale's words. In truth, Yi Zichen could understand. Never mind the demons and gods. Even the upper three realms' population had reached a saturation point. In order to prevent population growth, the upper three realms would also engage in a three-way war. However, this war existed purely for the sake of reducing clansmen. Once the numbers reach a certain point, all three sides would tacitly withdraw their troops. If the demons and gods had done the same, the demons wouldn't have been wiped out in the first place. I feel guilty towards the demons. At that moment, Yale's mood sank, and his tone grew somber. Pilar, you know better than anyone that we planned this war. Our original intention was to reduce the number of clansmen on both sides. But when we retreated, you stabbed us in the back. Pilar said through gritted teeth. The evil demon race and the god race were superior races. Without any natural enemies, the birth of their clansmen was completely unrestricted. The problem of the two races' population had always been the most troubling problem for the two races. The restrictions of the rules prevented them from declaring war on the lower races and plundering their land. They were the only two superior races, so if they wanted to reduce their numbers, they would have to declare war. This was what they had been doing all this time, and nothing had happened. However, the previous war, which was also a war to reduce the number of clansmen, had caused the destruction of Pilar's demon race. Why? It was Yale and the others who did not keep their promises. When the Fiend clan was preparing to withdraw from the extraterritorial battlefield, the four great divine kings of the extraterritorial divine race launched a sneak attack on them, causing them to lose all of their fiend power. The Fiend clansmen who came to participate in the battle were already covered in wounds. Facing the elites of the divine clan, they were slaughtered in less than half a month. After that, the divine clan wantonly attacked the Fiend clan and slaughtered the entire Fiend clan. The six great guardians under Pilar had sacrificed their lives to send him to the time corridor. From then on, the Fiend clan no longer existed. How could Pilar not be angry at such a treacherous act? The one who had instigated this war was Yale. Naturally, Pilar thought that he was the one who planned it. Demon King, I can only say sorry to you here. Suddenly, Yale's face darkened. He took a few steps back and deeply bowed to Pilar. This bow made the 12 main gods sitting in the hall widen their eyes. They were Yale's trusted followers, so they knew what kind of person he was. The Yale in front of them had not even bowed to the God Emperor. My original intention was really to reduce the number of clansmen on both sides. I never thought of invading the Fiend clan's territory. As for why this happened, I can only say that I'm just a chess piece on the chessboard. People in the game have no choice. At this time, Yale's eyes were filled with sincere apology. Pilar looked at him deeply. Not long after, his eyes flashed with a hint of surprise. You mean, it seems that the Demon King has already guessed it. Yale nodded with a calm face. Although my title is Destruction, I'm not a tyrannical person. Actually, I had good intentions in facilitating this war. I wanted to reduce the number of clansmen on both sides. However, I'm not the one with the highest position in the God clan. I can't say who this person is, but I believe that the Demon King can guess who he is. So I've wronged you. Despite Yale's answer, Pilar still snorted angrily, his nose brimming with cold air. I wouldn't dare. Yale shook his head. The destruction of the Fiend clan is a fact. I was the one who instigated this war. This is also a fact. The destruction of the Fiend clan, as the Demon King, you're naturally furious. In fact, I really wanted to do what I did in the beginning. I wanted to mock and ridicule you to the end and take everything on myself. Yes, since you think that it was my plan, I might as well go all the way. It's just that I can't do it. I have no way to treat someone who trusts me and trusts me with his back without any scruples. You trusted me, so I did it. But in the end, I failed to live up to your trust. With that, Yale shook his head and laughed at himself. Whether you believe it or not, when the higher-ups decided to act against the Fiend clan, I voted against it. Unfortunately, I was weak. My vote against it couldn't reverse the trend. In the end, it was my fault. If I hadn't contacted you to facilitate this war, this wouldn't have happened. In the end, it was my fault. Yale's emotions were very clear. The self-mockery in his words and expression made it impossible to find any flaws. This display of emotion made the hostility in Pilar's eyes lessen. However, he wasn't completely moved by Yale's words. No matter what, the hatred of the extermination of the Fiend clan was absolutely irreconcilable. If Yale could resolve this enmity with just a few words, would Pilar still be considered a demon king? Chapter 1741. No one would have guessed the meeting would end like this. Yale's 12 overgods had all left. During this time, Yi Zichen glanced at the female overgod a few more times. Unfortunately, after leaving the divine palace, she hadn't met his gaze again. Even before the other overgods left, she'd left in a hurry. Hazy clouds obscured their vision. Buildings rose and fell like mirages. Yi Zichen knew that they were actually the Outerium god race's aura-shattering beasts. The god king of destruction led the way, while Yi Zichen and the others followed. On the way, no matter how much Pilar and Yi Zichen whispered to each other, he didn't so much as glance behind him. The materials here are terrifyingly hard. Yi Zichen held a handful of sand in his hand and frowned. He'd randomly picked up stones and crushed them into powder. It hadn't been easy for them to come to the outside. This might be their only chance to do so before clashing with the Outerium gods. In that case, Yi Zichen naturally had to seize this opportunity to gather as much information on the Outerium god race as possible. Yi Zichen examined the hardness of the stones and used them to determine how strong the Outerium god race's weapons were. Yi Zichen crushed the stones with his bare hands, but the stones here were far harder than those of the god, Yao, and demon realms. They were practically as hard as ordinary artifact forging materials. Going by that logic, the Outerium god race's weapons were far stronger than the god, Yao, and demon realms. That's only natural. The spatial density of the Outerium god race is much higher than that of the lower races. Their raw materials are naturally much higher as well. Pilar glanced around discreetly. Do you see those buildings? Yi Zichen nodded in response, even though they were heading towards the back of the divine palace. However, they still saw quite a few towering buildings around them. No more, no less. There were 12 of them in total. Those are the residences of Yale's 12 overgods. The materials used to build them are 100 times harder than the stones you just used. 100 times. Yi Zichen's foot suddenly froze. After a long while, he landed back on the ground, but his gaze never left the buildings. What do you think? The forging techniques of the god race aren't inferior to yours. They might even be stronger than yours. Don't you know how to purify your forging materials? Every single piece of stone in the buildings of those sovereigns has been hammered hundreds of times, compressing and discarding the impurities within them. These are just my conservative estimates. Pilar was right. The gods, Yao, and demons would also purify their materials when forging. It was not difficult to purify a material by 100 times. However, if the outsiders could do it as well, that wasn't good news for Yi Zichen. He was not worried about how to break through these buildings. The third era's main task was to defend against the god race's attack. As for attacking them, that would require further planning. But from this, it could be seen that the equipment of the Outer Realm Protoss was not on the same level as that of the Third Era. In terms of cultivation, Qinghai, who'd come to fetch Yi Zichen and Yi Zichen, was in the middle of the God Realm. However, he was also an emperor, and he had the power of a godhead. Yinshang, if you were to face Qinghai or those sovereigns, how confident would you be? When Yinshang heard this, he frowned deeply. It was obvious that he was calculating his chances of victory. If I were to face Qinghai and the others, I have a 70% chance of victory. As for the sovereigns, they haven't revealed their true strength. They only revealed a bit of their aura when we entered. I dare not be arrogant, but my chances against them are less than 30%. Against Yuzhan, though, I should be able to raise it to around 60%. Oh, this surprised Yi Zichen somewhat. Although Go Yuzhan was one of the 4 stars, due to his frivolous nature, he was always accompanied by the steady Yin Shang. People couldn't help but overlook him. Yi Zichen hadn't expected Yin Shang to have such a high opinion of Go Yuzhan. Emperor Star, although Yuzhan and I are both 4 stars, I'm the minister of the left, while he's the minister of the right. The minister of the right is in charge of external affairs, while the minister of the left is in charge of internal affairs. I might be better at scheming, but in terms of martial prowess, the minister of the right is far superior to me when it comes to connecting with the stars and activating their power, transmitted Yin Shang through his divine sense. Then he turned to Go Yuzhan. Yuzhan, what do you think? Yi Zichen looked over, hoping to hear a reassuring answer from Go Yuzhan. Unexpectedly, Go Yuzhan furrowed his brows and shook his hands under his sleeves. Then, he spoke with a dark expression. Less than 60%. I can take care of Qinghai and the others without using the power of the stars. Against those over-gods, my chances of winning are around 50% within 100 moves. After that, my chances are only 40%. Don't underestimate that woman. She looks weak and soft, but she's the strongest of them all. She's not much weaker than the God King of Destruction, Yale. If she fights me, then I only have a 10% chance of winning. If Big Sister Lu is here, then her chances might be higher than mine. However, since we come here, it means that Big Sister Lu has been captured. With my uncle and Big Sister Lu here, why don't we just surrender? Go Yuzhan suddenly changed the topic. Yi Zichen raised his hand and slapped Go Yuzhan's head. What? Do you have any shame? Yi Zichen roared angrily through his divine sense. We haven't even started fighting, yet you're already telling us that you're Song Jiang's descendant, right? Hey, don't say it. A fortune teller really did say that I'm Song Jiang's reincarnation. F***ck off. With Go Yuzhan's interruption, the heavy atmosphere lightened somewhat. However, amidst this relief, there was an even heavier reality. The strength of the god race was much stronger than he had imagined. Flying beasts were already troublesome enough. Not even Yin Shang and Go Yuzhan were confident they could defeat the 12 overgods. After all, after activating the power of the stars, they could be considered the cream of the crop of the gods, Yao, and demon realms. Their equipment and cultivation levels weren't as high as their opponents, but in terms of numbers, they weren't that much inferior to the gods, Yao, and demons. In fact, they might even have more. What's the point of fighting? Yi Zichen couldn't help but shout in his sea of consciousness. At that moment, someone viciously smacked him on the back of the head. He looked back and saw Go Yuzhan's hand, which he'd yet to retract in time. Wake up. We haven't even started fighting, and you're already so scared? You're the reincarnation of Song Jiang. You're the hope of our entire village. Wake up. What are you afraid of? At worst, we'll just die. We've lived for so long. Even in the modern realm, we'd be considered old, all right? Go Yuzhan cursed. Yi Zichen glanced at him, then laughed. Chapter 1744. Exquisite wine, jade dew, rare delicacies. The cool, white jade table was surrounded by the unique mist of the god race. It was like standing in a heavenly palace. Yale, Pilar, and Yale chatted merrily, toasting each other. From time to time, they gazed at the beautiful scenery as if they were close friends. After 3 rounds of wine, Yale gently placed the wine cup on the white jade table. When the bottom of the wine cup, which was also made of white jade, touched the surface of the table, it made a crisp sound. Yi Zichen and Pilar, who'd been distracted to begin with, put down their glasses, only to see Yale raise his glass high into the air and toast to Pilar. Demon King, this is a toast to you. Pilar raised his cup in response. Yale also opened his mouth at this moment. I know you're broad-minded and don't want to bring up the matter of your clan's extermination. It's just that you trusted me so much, yet you ended up like this. I really can't get over it. Take this cup of wine as my apology. I hope you'll do me the honor. If you really feel bad, why don't you cripple your own divine power and join me? Yale's face froze. Pilar looked into Yale's eyes. Before long, their eyes met, and they couldn't help but burst into laughter. Their laughter puzzled the nearby attendants, but they quickly retracted their grins. The Demon King likes to joke, as always. We can't let the atmosphere we've worked so hard to heat up die down just because of your words, can we? Pilar glanced at the wine in his cup, then poured it into a nearby pond. As soon as the nectar fell into the pond, it attracted groups of fish to crazily fight for the nectar in the pond. The water in the pool continued to churn, and Pilar placed the cup on the table at the same time. I won't drink this wine. If I did, I'd be letting down my clansmen. The God King of Destruction doesn't need to worry about me. No matter who I was before, I'm now a cripple. That's true. I wasn't thinking things through. In that case, I won't drink. The wine glass was placed on the table. Just as Yale sat up straight, a waiter brought him a pure white handkerchief. He gave the waiter a meaningful look, and the waiter brought them both a piece of cake. Star-Lord Yi, I've always had a question in my heart. Feel free to speak your mind. The handkerchief was casually thrown to the ground by Yale, and the waiter beside him immediately rushed over and bent over to pick it up. When Yi Zichen saw this, he squinted his eyes. Yale smiled. Don't worry. You seem to be an old acquaintance of mine. The War Goddess? War Goddess? Yi Zichen arched his brows, confusion flashing through his eyes. This was Yi Zichen's first visit to the God Realm. He'd never even heard of the War Goddess, so how could he possibly know her? It wasn't like he hadn't heard of it before. There was a goddess of war in Greek mythology, but that was just a myth. How could he know her? I wonder who the godly King of Destruction is referring to. Don't tell me you don't know her. She's the only female chief god in my divine palace. She's my subordinate, the War Goddess. Earlier, I saw Star-Lord Yi exchange glances with her, and the way they looked at each other definitely didn't feel like they didn't know each other. Could it be that I was mistaken? Said Yale. You mean? Yi Zichen understood. He remembered that female chief god. It was just as Yale said. They'd exchanged glances since entering the divine palace. The main reason was that the female chief god looked at him strangely. Unfortunately, he had no impression of her at all. He'd only glanced at her a few times. He hadn't expected Yale to notice even that. Either he cared a lot about Yi Zichen, or he cared a lot about that female chief god. I don't know her. This is my first time meeting the War Goddess. Perhaps it's because she looks rather familiar, so I couldn't help but take a few more glances. Intimate, huh? Star-Lord Yi is indeed extraordinary. Yale laughed loudly. What? Ever since the War Goddess returned to the God Realm, she's treated everyone with cold indifference. Even I'm an outsider, yet Star-Lord Yi says she's familiar? How could she be ordinary? Maybe I sensed wrongly. Yi Zichen shook his head and smiled, then looked at Yale. It seems the God King of Destruction cares a lot about that female chief god. To tell you the truth, she's my sweetheart. Yale didn't try to hide it. In truth, everyone in the God Palace of Destruction knew about his feelings for the War Goddess. The attendants didn't find it strange, and their expressions remained the same. Yi Zichen smiled in understanding, hurriedly picked up his cup, and filled it to the brim. I never would have guessed it was the God King of Destruction's sweetheart. I lost my composure, so I'll punish myself with a cup. I hope you won't take offense. Yi Zichen ignored Yale's raised hand and drained his cup in one gulp. When he saw that his cup was empty, Yale could only lower his hand and shake his head helplessly with a sigh. However, at that moment, he sensed a deep, fierce gaze directed at him like a sharp sword. He looked ahead and saw Yi Zichen squinting at him, his cheeks rosy. Star-Lord Yi, God King of Destruction. Yi Zichen's gaze was sincere as he looked at the God King of Destruction. We've come, and we've drunk. You should know why we're here. Isn't it about time you fulfilled your promise? Yale froze. He stared at Yi Zichen for a long time, then smiled meaningfully. Star-Lord Yi's promise, Will the God King of Destruction release Xiao Yume and the others and my brothers? Unbeknownst to them, a servant girl was intentionally eavesdropping on their conversation some distance away from the banquet table. Will the God King of Destruction release Xiao Yume and the others and my brothers? Although she was far away, Yi Zichen's question reached the servant girl's ears without missing a single word. Xiao Yume? Why does that name sound so familiar? Suddenly, the servant girl's eyes widened. Her shocked expression caused the other attendants to look in her direction. When she sensed everyone's attention, the servant girl hurriedly feigned pain. I'm feeling a bit unwell, so I'll leave things here to you. I want to go back and rest. This, His Excellency the God King. No, I really can't take it anymore. Even if I stay here, it'll be hard for me to serve the God King and his esteemed guests. In order to convince the others, the servant girl secretly circulated her divine power in reverse. Chapter 1745. The attendants of the palace all knew Yale's temperament. In order to prevent the maid from being punished, the other attendants carefully covered for her and allowed her to leave through the back door. After confirming that the maidservant had left safely, the attendants continued with their work in an orderly manner. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Outside the Northern God Clan's God of Destruction palace, a blur nimbly traversed through the clouds. To be able to maintain such speed in such a dense fog, it was clear that this person had long since known the surroundings of the God of Destruction palace. Xiao Yumei. If I remember correctly, Big Sister has always been muttering this name, the blur said in a low voice. A whisper could be heard from the afterimage. The person shuttling through the clouds was none other than Lin Yuan's maidservant. Although the maid was very anxious, she kept an eye on her surroundings as she traversed through the streets. After a few twists and turns, she circled around a building more than 10 times before she found a secret door and went in. Behind the door was a plainly decorated boudoir. There was a woman pacing back and forth in the room. Her eyes flickered with panic, and she clenched her fists tightly. She bit her lips so hard that a row of teeth marks appeared. Big Sister, why did you come back? If Yale discovers you again, even if I accept you as my adopted sister, I won't be able to save you. A fierce expression flashed across the woman's face. She was none other than the war goddess, one of the 12 master gods under Yale. Although the maid was indeed one of her people, Yale had discovered her once. Fortunately, she had taken her in as her sworn sister, and Yale had spared the maid's life for her sake. Now that the maid had secretly returned to her god's residence, if Yale discovered her, the problem would be severe. Although she reprimanded her, the war goddess's concern for the maid was real. When she saw the maid's pale face, she hurriedly stretched out her hand to check her meridians. Why is the divine power in your body so chaotic? Who bullied you? Big Sister, don't worry about me. I did it myself. The maidservant pulled on the war goddess's hand. When the war goddess saw her anxious expression, she frowned. The maidservant said, Big Sister, do you know someone called Xiao Yumei? Who is she? What's there to hide between you and me? Just now, when I was serving the God King of Destruction, that Star Lord from the Third Epic mentioned this name. Him? What did he say? The God King of Destruction should have captured Xiao Yumei and many others. They're here to ask for them. The cloud and smoke dispersed in an instant. A speck of white light floated in the air. The dim light made the garden slightly brighter. Yi Zichen and the others had come here for Xiao Yumei and the others, but the God King of Destruction still hadn't mentioned it. This made Yi Zichen rather anxious. The God King of Destruction smiled when he heard this. This smile was very strange, and no one could tell what he was thinking. Then he placed his fingers on the white jade table and began to knock on it, causing the already anxious Yi Zichen's emotions to fluctuate even more intensely. Godly King of Destruction, it can't be that you don't want to release him, right? As he spoke, Yi Zichen's expression completely darkened. His solemn expression was so dark that it seemed like it could drip water at any moment. If the God King of Destruction had gone back on his word, then the letter was a trap. Yi Zichen accepted it. For the sake of Xiao Yumei and the other's safety, he was willing to put himself in danger. At worst, it would just be a life-and-death struggle. Whoosh! A staff appeared out of thin air in Go Yuzhan's hands. As it streaked through the air, it whistled through the air. The attendants in the garden hurriedly took a few steps back. At the same time, several people appeared by Yale's side and glared fiercely at Yi Zichen and the others. It seems Your Excellency, the God King, is really going back on his word. Yi Zichen, who'd never held out hope, smiled coolly. The people behind Yale were the best proof of that. If Yale had truly wanted to invite them to a banquet, he would have let Xiao Yumei and the others go after the banquet. Then, as soon as Go Yuzhan took out his weapon, his subordinates, who'd left long ago, wouldn't have appeared behind him. This was all premeditated. Right now, he didn't care about his own survival. When he decided to come to the God Realm, he'd prepared for the worst. However, Yin Shang and Go Yuzhan originally had nothing to do with them, yet they'd been dragged into this mess. Earlier, Go Yuzhan had said that even he wasn't completely confident in facing off against these overgods. What's more, 11 overgods had appeared behind Yale. The only one missing was the goddess of war. Master of the stars, it seems they're ready to attack. In a moment, Yuzhan and I will burn our starlight. Although we might not be their match, we could delay them for a while. Take advantage of the chaos to escape. Yin Shang's divine sense transmission appeared in Yi Zichen's sea of consciousness. Yi Zichen looked at him. By now, Yin Shang's eyes were filled with the power of the stars. Amidst their dazzling brilliance, Yi Zichen could even see a wisp of fire. It seemed he was ready to burn his starlight to buy Yi Zichen time to retreat. God King of Destruction, stand down. After a long silence, Yale turned to the overgods behind him and roared angrily. Master, these people want to hurt you. What a joke. The Epic Star Lord and the Fiend King are my honored guests, and they were invited here. If the Fiend King wants to attack me, I can understand. But I have no enmity with Celestial Lord Ji Yuan. Why would Celestial Lord Ji Yuan want to kill me? Yale barked harshly, and the 11 sovereigns behind him all lowered their eyes and took 2 steps back. At that moment, Yale turned around and cupped his fists towards Yi Zichen apologetically. Planet Lord Epic, I have offended you. My subordinates are too insensible and have startled you. I will punish myself with a cup of wine. Without waiting for an explanation, Yale filled his cup and downed it in one gulp. The wine cup was placed on the table with a clink. Yale even used his hand to wipe the corners of his mouth in a forthright manner. I understand that Star Lord Epic came here for the sake of a beauty. However, this seed has been friends with Star Lord Yi for a long time, which is why I want to drink a few more cups. Who knew that Star Lord would be so impatient? It seems that Star Lord does not trust this seat. Yi Zichen did not reply. Yale let out a long sigh. Never mind. Since Star Lord Yi doesn't want to drink with me, then I won't force you. Being able to witness the Star Lord's glory today can be considered fulfilling my wish. How about this, the pain? This subordinate is here. Go and invite the guests of the 3rd era over. Tell them to return with Star Lord Yi. Understood. Chapter 1747. Meeting friends through martial arts. As soon as Yale said this, the 10 overgods behind him raised their heads proudly. Although they hadn't released their godhead's power, everyone in the garden could feel the pressure around them increase. What on earth is this guy trying to do? Yi Zichen didn't respond directly. Instead, he pondered his intentions. Before long, however, Yi Zichen understood. This was Yale's overt scheme. The letter clearly stated that Yale wouldn't do anything to Yi Zichen and the others if they came here. In other words, there was no such thing as a feast at Hongmen. At their level, oaths were bound to be taken seriously. Yi Zichen wouldn't break the letter or set up an ambush for them, but that didn't mean he couldn't do it in other ways. For example, this friendly competition. Yale had agreed to release Xiao Yumei and the others, and he'd even sent his subordinates to fetch them. However, Yi Zichen and the others didn't know where they were being held, and how long they'd take was up to Yale. Yale and the others could buy time and heavily injure Yin Shang and the others. It was true that sparring should be stopped when the time was right, but if they really were injured, they couldn't blame them. If they were injured, Yi Zichen and the others naturally couldn't bring them back to the 3rd era. Staying here to recuperate was no different from being locked up. From the start, Yale had smiled at them. He'd never considered himself a god king of destruction. He'd treated them like a host. Now, Yale had agreed to release Xiao Yumei and the others. His only request was that they meet friends through martial arts and exchange pointers. If Yi Zichen refused, he'd be giving him no face. One overt scheme. Yi Zichen's expression didn't change, but inwardly, he marveled at Yale's ruthlessness. Star Lord Yi, what do you think? When he saw that Yi Zichen still hadn't responded, Yale asked again, then laughed don't worry. Star-Lord Yi, there's no need to worry. My subordinates have all experienced hundreds of thousands of battles. We're just sparring, so we'll stop when the time is right. They know how to control their strength, and there's no way they'll hurt your two heroes. What a joke. Whoosh. Go Yuzhan, who had long since prepared himself for battle, swept his staff fiercely, and a violent gust of wind caused the wine cups on the table to sway. The surrounding green plants also bent under the pressure of the strong wind, and the starlight in his eyes burned. His entire body was releasing a sharp aura. They even injured us. If we really fight, I think you should be more worried about your subordinates. I'm not as good at fighting as your subordinates. The number of battles I've experienced over the years can be counted on two hands, and my control of strength isn't as good as your subordinates. I wonder if the godly king of destruction has won. If the other sovereign candidates are crippled by me during the spar, you have to find a substitute to replace them. Such a merciless shout caused the faces of the 10 sovereigns behind Yale to freeze. However, no one on Yi Zichen's side spoke up to stop Go Yuzhan. Not even Yin Shang, the most rational of them all, spoke up. An enemy was an enemy, no matter how Yale treated them. The Third Era and the Outer Realm God Race were enemies. Just now, it seemed like Yale was trying to comfort Yi Zichen, but in reality, he was slandering Yi Zichen's subordinates and saying they were inferior to his sovereigns. This was an insult to Yi Zichen's dignity. How could he tolerate such behavior? Insolence. One of the sovereigns couldn't help but curse. Go Yuzhan looked at him disdainfully and didn't so much as glance at him. This infuriated the sovereigns, but without Yale's orders, no matter how angry they were, they couldn't act rashly. Star-Lord Ye's subordinates sure are impressive, laughed Yale. It's not that we're impressive, it's that you, Lord Yale, are too arrogant. Yin Shang narrowed his eyes and laughed. When Yale heard that, his expression grew unsightly. He could lower himself to be on equal footing with Yi Zichen. However, it was Yi Zichen's subordinates who'd spoken, and their words were filled with disrespect. Yale's brows furrowed with fury. However, in the Outer Realm, where the God Race fought and schemed against each other, for Yale to become the God King of Destruction, he was naturally more shrewd than most people. In an instant, he retracted his anger and looked at Yi Zichen. Star-Lord Yi, I'm truly sorry, said Yi Zichen. They're my auxiliary stars, so I was too arrogant and spoiled. If I said something that displeased the God King, I hope you won't take it to heart. No matter, snorted Yale. Then his gaze shifted. I just wonder, Star-Lord Yi, isn't it just making friends through martial arts? I love making friends through martial arts. Before Yale could finish his sentence, Go Yuzhan interrupted him with a cold snort. He swung his staff, blazing with starlight, and took a step forward. Then he turned to Yi Zichen and said, Star-Lord, Minister of the Right requests permission to fight. Go on, said Yi Zichen. Go on, but don't go too hard on them. We're guests. If you injure one of the sovereigns here, it'll be hard to explain. Let's see if they're strong enough. With that, Go Yuzhan pointed his staff at the 10 sovereigns behind Yale. Who dares to fight? Ha! Star-Lord Yi and this auxiliary star of yours are truly vicious. Yale maintained the smile on his face, but the resentment in his heart flickered vaguely in his eyes. Rhythm, go and try it out with this hero. Remember to be careful. Don't get hurt. The other side has already said it. If you get hurt, it'll be my loss of face. Don't worry, God King. I won't let you down. As they spoke, a skinny young man in brown robes walked out from the 10 God Kings. The youth's eyes were as clear as the sea. When you looked into them, you couldn't help but sink into them. You'd be at peace. However, the instant he stepped forward, boom, divine power surged out like a tidal wave, and a godhead emerged from between his brows. The divine power transformed into threads that formed a guqin above his head. His hair danced wildly in the wind, and his clear eyes instantly turned crimson. His entire person was releasing a tyrannical aura from the inside out. This violent aura was a strong contrast to his previous tranquility. Chapter 1748. Sister, they're about to make a move. Above the void of the divine palace, The war goddess lightly stepped on the void and carefully hid herself and her maidservant in the clouds. She came here after receiving news of Xiao Yumei. They arrived just as Go Yuzhan and God King of Destruction Yale were making their threats. It seems like Yale has been wary of me. The war goddess furrowed her brows and muttered softly. Right now, all of Yale's deity kings were present except for her, the war goddess. Yale's intentions were clear. Do you know where Xiao Yumei is being held? The servant looked troubled. She was just a servant and had only heard about Xiao Yumei by chance. She had only found out about Xiao Yumei by chance. As for where she was being held, even the war goddess didn't know. So how could a maid know? When she asked this, the war goddess knew that she had asked in vain. However, she couldn't release her god power now. She was only one step away from becoming a god king, but the difference between a god king and a god king was huge. Moreover, Yale had been a famous god king for a long time and was a peak existence even amongst god kings. Normal god kings couldn't hide from him. If the war goddess dared to release her god power, she would definitely be discovered. Suddenly, the war goddess noticed that one of the 11 god kings under Yale was missing. Why isn't the god of pain here? Sister, I'll go ask for you, the servant replied. The maidservant replied. Then, a communication device unique to the god race appeared in her hand. In less than 100 breaths, the servant took it back. The god of pain went to pick up Xiao Yumei and the others. They're heading north of the divine palace. You're basking in my glory. The maid knew that the war goddess was confused. With her status, it was impossible for her to have any intelligence network. She explained, when the other servants found out that you accepted me as your sworn sister, many of them became friends with me. However, there were also many who did not want to serve the King of God. Thinking about working for you, they became even more friendly with me. I just asked the servants who wanted to come to you, and they told me. North of the divine palace. The war goddess muttered to herself. The layout of the divine palace appeared in her mind as she searched for a place where Xiao Yumei and the others could be held. Lover's Bend. Suddenly, the goddess of war's expression froze. The maidservant beside her was stunned as well. She naturally knew about the Gulf of the Fallen Phoenix. Or perhaps it could be said that as long as it was someone from the Outer Rim God clan, they would know about it. Tens of thousands of years ago, the original name of Lover's Cove was Fallen Phoenix Bend. The most important part of this place was its bay. The Bay of the Fallen Phoenix, which was north of the Shrine of Destruction, had a total of 99 winding roads. It was said in ancient times that the last divine beast, the Phoenix, was buried here. The bow of the fallen Phoenix came from this place. The Phoenix of the Outer Realm celestial race symbolized love. Many Outer Realm celestial race couples would come because of its fame and go through 99 detours. But the bend of the fallen Phoenix was still the bend of the fallen Phoenix, until it was because of the earth-shattering love story of the Northern God clan's Qing family's beloved daughter that it was renamed Lover's Bend. However, the love of the proud daughter of the Qing clan wasn't recognized by the God clans. She was expelled from the Qing clan, and there was no place for her in the God clans. The Qing family was also punished, and due to some twists and turns in the process, it was reduced from the number 1 family of the Outer Realm God race to a second-rate family. As for Lover's Bend, it was designated a forbidden area. No one was allowed to take even half a step inside. The maid was shocked that the war goddess had mentioned Lover's Bend. After all, the God Emperor had ordered Lover's Bend to be sealed. By hiding people there, the God King of Destruction was breaking the God Emperor's rules. Big sister, he's definitely there. There's no way the North God clan can hide this place. Of all places, the pain is to the north of the Shrine of Destruction. Then you stay here. I'll go there myself. Big sister, that's the forbidden area the God Emperor mentioned. If the God Emperor finds out, I can't worry about that. Then the people down there, I trust Yi Zichen will naturally have a way to deal with this. If he can't even deal with this, then I'd have wasted all that effort. Halfway through her sentence, the war goddess suddenly cut herself off. The maid looked at her in confusion, only to see that her face was bright red. Big sister? All right, stay here and don't move around, and don't recklessly release your divine power. I'm going to Lover's Bend. If there's any news, let me know immediately. However, before she could take more than a few steps, boom. In truth, Go Yuzhan's trash talk was Yin Shang's strategy. If Yale kept calm, Yi Zichen's subordinates would have a hard time breaking out of the encirclement. Only by provoking him verbally would they lose their rationality. That way, Yi Zichen and the others would have a better chance of victory. Unfortunately, Go Yuzhan's trash talk was indeed directed at Yale, and every word he uttered was devastating. Yet, Yale remained calm and collected the entire time. On the other hand, his subordinates' eyes were bloodshot with fury. What shameless boasting! The dispatched overgod gripped his daggers, his shoulders trembling uncontrollably. Go Yuzhan seemed to be staring intently at the overgod, but he was actually looking at Yale out of the corner of his eye. His divine sense was frantically communicating with Yin Shang and Yi Zichen. Yin Shang, are you messing with me? I can't beat this overgod. Calm down, said Yin Shang. Yin Shang said, even if you didn't enrage Yale, it's still a good thing for you to have enraged his subordinate. Bullshit. Vulgar, Yin Shang said unhurriedly. The angrier he gets, the more openings he'll make. Naturally, that's a good thing for you. Or do you want him to fight you calmly? I don't want to fight him. Yin Shang was silent for a while. Then there's nothing we can do. Now that things have gotten to this point, all we can do is kill Great General Go. Hurry up and get the hell out of my sight. No wonder martial arts didn't follow literature in ancient times. You people who meddle in internal affairs are a scourge to us generals. Go Yuzhan cursed loudly, but his curses were directly blocked by Yin Shang. Yale's calmer than I thought. Isn't that inevitable? No matter what, he's the god king of his generation. If a little trick like this enraged him, I'd really have to re-evaluate the god king who destroyed the demon race, said Yi Zichen, frowning. The situation is clearly heading in a bad direction. We have to think about how to deal with the demon race. If we want to escape. Where's Wen Xiu? Didn't he come to the outside as well? Go Yuzhan shouted angrily through divine sense transmission. We've been in the outside for so long, but we haven't seen him at all. This guy is seriously. Before he'd even finished speaking, boom, a loud noise suddenly rang out in the sky above the Northern God clan. Everyone in the forest garden, including Yale, looked towards the north. Chapter 1750. Enemy Attack. Go Yuzhan, who was wielding his staff, was so excited that he almost cried. It had come just in time. If it had been just a little later, he might have had a fight with this chief god. Although he had fused with the power of the stars, his realm had changed drastically from before. But he had too little combat experience. His single method of attack had become his biggest weakness. If he had completely fused with the memories of the previous Star-Lord, he wouldn't have been so afraid. But forget it. There was nothing much to say. In the end, it was all because he was too lazy. If he had been more diligent in the past and comprehended half of the previous Star-Lord's moves, he could have beaten that chief god to a pulp. Go Yuzhan swore that when he returned to Chaos City, he would fuse with the memories of the previous Star-Lord. As for this duel, since someone was attacking the Outer Realm Protoss, the duel probably wouldn't continue. As expected, when the words enemy attack rang out in the garden, Yale's gaze darkened. The chief gods under him, including the chief god who was about to fight Go Yuzhan, all looked in Yale's direction. Master, some were waiting for Yale's orders, while a few chief gods were already flying in the direction of the rumbling. Who dares to be so presumptuous in front of the Protoss? Whoosh! Before he could finish, a cold wind started blowing in the northern lands of the Divine Palace. The biting cold wind was like a wailing ghost, howling. In an instant, the surroundings of the Divine Palace had turned into a world of ice and snow. The chief gods' godheads in the air were burning, resisting the cold and wind. But the ordinary Outer Realm Protoss warriors with low realms weren't so lucky. They looked to the north of the Divine Palace and saw frozen sculptures of all kinds. Hey, eat my demon-subduing staff. Suddenly, a sharp sneer appeared in the howling snow and ice. Countless golden afterimages appeared in the world of ice and snow. The staff fell to the ground, and countless ice sculptures turned to dust. Dazzling ice crystals scattered on the ground, blending with a world of ice and snow. As for the gods sealed in ice, not a single godhead was left. Damn monkey, can't you leave some for me? You were the one who couldn't get the kill, and now you're blaming me? Why don't you try to steal from me if you dare? Old son, won't be able to steal a kill. All right, monkey, you're good. Remember what you said? Boom, boom, boom. Gold and darkness mixed together, causing this snowy land to become especially strange. Everyone could only see streaks of golden light and pitch-black shadows shuttling through the ice and snow. They were like the scythe of the Grim Reaper, harvesting the lives of the gods who were sealed in ice. It's Big Sis Lure. Go Yuuzhan's eyes widened as he transmitted his divine sense. As far as he could remember, the only one who could use the power of ice and snow to such an extent was the queen of the nine-tailed fox clan. She was also one of the 4 great auxiliary stars, the martial song planets Su-Lu-Er. There was no need for him to say it. Yi Zichen and Yin Shang both understood. If it was ice and snow, perhaps other races also had people who used ice and snow, but the conversation that came from the ice and snow just now, clearly it was Yang Jian and the great sage. Not only that, but everyone's vision was filled with ice and snow. They might even be able to see some golden light and dark shadows, but if they looked closely, they would see a green light of recovery under this brilliance. Recovery naturally represented life. Of course, only Su Yin could use the power of life. From the looks of it, the great sage and the others had to be the ones breaking out of the divine palace. Master, it's the aura of the godhead of life. Yale's overgod focused his gaze. As soon as he finished speaking, someone else chimed in. They're coming from the north. If there's nothing unexpected, Yi Zichen's eyes flashed with joy that the great sage and the others were safe. Suddenly, he sensed several gazes fixed on him. If there was nothing unexpected, these gazes belonged to Yale and the others. Heavenly lightning, 10,000 caddies. Right around Yale and the sovereigns beneath him, multiple bolts of purplish-red lightning suddenly descended. The lightning came so suddenly that the overgods had no choice but to focus on it. Yi Zichen took advantage of this opportunity to grab Pilar's arm. Let's go. Yi Zichen and Pilar led the way. Go Yuuzhan didn't waste any time. He swung his staff at the rhythm overgod's shoulder, then followed Yi Zichen and the others to meet up with the great sage and the others. However, as they retreated, they saw Yin Shang standing in place. He was still forming hand seals and muttering to himself. Yin Shang, let's go. You guys go first. Yin Shang's gaze was sharp as he looked at the overgods in Yale, who'd already been swallowed up by the lightning. I'll give them a big present. Meteor fall. Whoosh, whoosh. As soon as he finished speaking, countless flaming meteorites suddenly fell from the void above the divine palace. When Yin Shang saw the meteors, he wiped the corners of his mouth, stomped the ground, and crushed the white jade beneath his feet to dust. Then, he shot through the sky like a cannonball. The meteors covered a vast area, covering practically half of the divine palace of destruction. The overgods, who'd suffered at Yi Zichen's lightning's hands, had just escaped when they sensed something even more dangerous waiting for them. They looked up into the sky and saw that the meteors were just about to reach their noses. The scorching waves of fire and ear-piercing rumbles made the overgods' eyes bloodshot. Annihilate! At that moment, a soft, slow voice sounded out from behind the overgods. They looked behind them and saw, to their astonishment, the God King of Destruction, pointing at the sky. As soon as he finished speaking, the meteorites that were about to land on the ground were really annihilated in the void, turning into thick smoke that fell like rain. This God King of Destruction really does have some skill, muttered Yin Shang as he chased after Yi Zichen. Yin Shang muttered as he chased after Yi Zichen, but he spared no effort in chasing after the great sage. The meteor's destructive power had been reduced, but the thick smoke still caused quite a bit of trouble for Yale and the others. Yale's overgods controlled the surrounding wind to disperse the smoke. The other overgods hurried to Yale's side. Master, are you all right? Yale waved his hand, and one of the overgods by his side spoke up. The third era's people have all fled. They've most likely gone to meet up with the people we captured earlier. Should we head over now and bring them back? How dare they attack you, Master? They got some guts. Ah, it's fine. Yale waved his hand nonchalantly. What was even more surprising was that his eyes were still as gentle as water. Chapter 1752. The Northern God race's divine palace of destruction was like the forbidden city of ancient emperors. The defenses of this city were definitely the most secure in the entire Northern Divine clan outside of the borders. When the Lovers' Bend riots broke out, experts continuously appeared around the Divine Palace, wanting to capture the enemies who were wreaking havoc within the Divine Palace. Unfortunately, the ice breath was too strong. The raging ice storm transformed the area into a sea of ice and snow. Any God race expert who entered this ice breath, even if they had divine power, would still become stiff and sluggish due to the icy cold energy. In a battle between experts, victory or defeat could be determined by a hair's breadth. Even a single move could cost him his life, not to mention the fact that he would need to use more than one move after his body stiffened. The sky was filled with goldenrod shadows, like a broom that covered the sky, falling from the frost storm unceasingly. The great sage's entire body was burning with a layer of golden flames. From afar, he looked like a holy Buddha with a golden body. However, his behavior was very different from that of holy Buddha. Buddhas didn't like killing, they were compassionate. But in just a few hundred breaths of time, no fewer than 100 souls had died to the great sage's staff. That Lu Er's breath of ice really saves me a lot of trouble. The great sage grinned. With Lu Er's breath of ice at his side, dealing with the other experts of the divine realm really was a lot easier. If the weaker ones entered the breath of ice's range, just defending against it would consume more than half of their divine power. Even against the great sage and Yang Jian, two killing gods, they couldn't escape death. Quite a few didn't even need the great sage to do anything. The breath of ice alone was enough to exhaust their divine power and seal them in ice and snow. Three-eyed devil, how many have you killed? The great sage tilted his head. A black blur appeared right behind the God race expert. Before long, the expert was swallowed up by the darkness. His eyes lifeless, he collapsed into the thick layer of ice and snow. Right, 110. Only after he'd finished off the expert did Yang Jian gradually reveal himself. Then you've lost for sure. I've killed more than 110. There's still one more in the breath of ice. Even if I give it to you, you'll at most be able to fight me to a draw, laughed the great sage. Besides, I'll take the rest. In an instant, a hairy, thunder-mouthed monkey suddenly appeared beside the God race expert who was still resisting tenaciously in the ice breath. Under his horrified gaze, the monkey's rod fell, and a stream of golden blood flowed out from the top of his head. 112. Are you angry? Don't be so smug. Yang Jian snorted angrily. If he hadn't been careless in the beginning, the great sage wouldn't have stolen so many kills. This big sister Lu Er's ice breath is really powerful. My heaven, I sees that there are quite a few extraterritorial celestials outside. Perhaps it's because they've seen the extent to which their predecessors have been exhausted by her ice breath that they don't dare enter. If they still dare to enter, don't talk about those useless things. A loss is a loss. Don't forget to serve tea for the next 6 months. I didn't make this bet with you. Yang Jian frowned. Besides, it's still uncertain who will win. Hey, we already said long ago that only the people in ice breath, those outside, don't count. Who said it's outside? With that, Yang Jian turned into a black blur and dashed forward. The great sage squinted his eyes and looked in the direction Yang Jian left in. Only then did he see that there were still 4 people who had recklessly entered the icy storm. Brat, wait for me. Old son, Yi Zichen and the others struggled to advance against the storm. Go Yuzhan walked to the very front and continuously waved his rod to divert the wind. Big Sister Lu Er's ice breath is even stronger than before. Yin Shang also sent a transmission with his divine sense. Go Yuzhan, who was walking at the front, struggled so much that he couldn't even speak. There's a situation. Suddenly, Go Yuzhan, who was walking in front, stopped and looked around cautiously. The snowstorm was so huge that it was impossible to see anything beyond half a meter with the naked eye. They had been using their divine senses to investigate the situation in front of them, but just now, Go Yuzhan, who was leading the way, felt a hint of danger. Go Yuzhan, who had his eyes closed, suddenly reached his rod backwards. Just as his rod was about to touch Yi Zichen, a black afterimage also appeared. Yi Zi, Yang Jian. The black blur was clearly stunned. Yi Zichen was stunned for a moment, then saw Go Yuzhan's rod strike towards Yang Jian from behind. Dong Dong. Yang Jian, who had a look of confusion on his face, nearly knelt down from the blow. Yi Zichen quickly stopped him. I don't know, I couldn't hold back just now. Just now, the aura that Yang Jian released was clearly hostile towards them. How could he know that the person who came was Yang Jian? Go Yuzhan scratched his head with a wry smile. Yang Jian rubbed his back and stood up. It's fine. I don't want to fight you guys just now, but Big Sister Lu Er's icy aura is too strong. I couldn't tell who it was with my divine sense at all. I thought it was those bastards of the god race. Ugh, but you really are vicious. Yang Jian grimaced in pain, while Go Yuzhan scratched his head with a coy smile. Sorry, eat me. Hey, Easy, why is it you guys? The great sage, who was a step behind Yang Jian, also arrived late. He glanced at Yang Jian, who was rubbing his back, then at Go Yuzhan, who was scratching his head. Uncle. Go Yuzhan lowered his head, not daring to meet the great sage's gaze. Good hit. Unexpectedly, the great sage walked over to his side and patted him heavily on the shoulder. Nephew Gu, that was a good blow. As expected of my old son's legacy. Let me see. Z's, his entire back is bruised. All right, you have about 30% of my old son's strength. The great sage's fiery eyes of truth allowed him to easily see the condition of Yang Jian's back. When he saw the bruise on Yang Jian's back, he couldn't help but clap his hands in delight. That was a good hit. Uncle will reward you properly when we get back. Hey, thanks, Uncle. Go Yuzhan was overjoyed. Yi Zichen really had to hand it to the great sage. Even now, he was still gossiping. Seeing that Yang Jian was about to start arguing with the great sage, Yi Zichen tried to change the subject, but the great sage beat him to it. Why did you guys come here? Could it be you were captured as well? Monkey, do you know how to speak properly? Doesn't that mean we were captured? Yang Jian glared viciously at the great sage. The great sage hurriedly straightened his back and coughed. I misspoke. Don't mind the details. Easy. Why did you guys come here? Of course we came to save you, Uncle, said Go Yuzhan. You brat. I thought you were sensible just now, but now you're spouting nonsense. Who's your uncle? Can these outsider trash catch us? Do we need you to save us?